Okay, so last class, we went through page 1, we went through page 2. I'm literally, don't let me go too far off topic, so I don't want to spend an hour going recapping. I want to maybe spend 4 or 5 minutes kind of going through what we started with last week. We got a date, know who your buyers are, know what the address is, basically know who you're selling the property to, and make sure you're completing the address and all the rest of that stuff properly, and you know what you're selling. We spent a lot of time talking about should we put in a hard date or we should put 45 days or 60 days after acceptance. We discussed that. I am a fan of a hard date for all of the reasons we already talked about. There's nothing wrong with putting in 45 days. If you're going to do that, just be prepared. Be prepared for the possible problems with that. But I will never write an offer without a hard date. That's just how I do it, and I would suggest you guys follow my lead. We talked about agency. We've got to make sure we get our agency disclosure signed prior to having your buyer sign the contract. Similar statement should be made. Have your sellers sign an agency prior to them signing the listing agreement. Okay, that's just the proper order of things doing that. We talked about the DA form. That's the form, the disclosure regarding an agent may represent more than one buyer or seller. Typical stuff, standard operating procedure. We talked about the agency confirmation, which is item C. Brokerage firm for the listing agent goes up. We check the appropriate box. Brokerage firm for the agent representing the buyer or the selling firm, of course, goes up. The appropriate box is checked. We talked about financing. We talked about deposits. Okay, I like earnest money deposits in the neighborhood of 3% of the purchase price. Okay, I get scared if I'm representing the buyer. As a general rule, I don't want to have an earnest money deposit above 3%. Low deposits, frankly, I feel just as strongly about them. If I'm representing the buyer and they only want to give me a $500 deposit on a $500,000 offer, I have some work to do and basically explaining to them why that's a problem. Now, for clarity, last week I talked about if I'm the listing agent, okay? If I'm the listing agent and William comes in and he's brand new representing the buyer, and he gives me a $100,000 earnest money deposit on a $500,000 property, I love that. It's a 20% earnest money deposit. It's certainly more than 3%. As the listing agent, I will absolutely let the buyer's agent commit that buyer as deeply as he possibly can. And I'm certainly not going to say, oh, time out, I think your deposit's too much. But if you're representing the buyer, just be careful with that. Increased deposit, we talked about. In most cases, you guys will never be using the increased deposit. To give you a quick example, that $500 example, if for some reason, let's leave the reason aside, if for some reason the best you could get your buyer to commit to, I'm now writing the offer for the buyer, the best I could get him to commit to is a $500 deposit on my $500,000 offer. And then I might sit back and say, okay, well, if you do get your offer accepted, can you increase that $500 deposit to a $15,000 deposit within 7 days? If I could then get buy-in on that, that's where I would want to put that. But I would much rather have the deposit up in the first line from the very beginning. Other than that, you're not going to be using increased deposit for the most part. Again, be careful. If you're representing sellers, you'll see down payments going here a lot. Okay, we talked about that. Agents don't understand what they're putting on. They think they're putting in the balance of the down payment. Instead, they're putting in the deposit. The balance of the down payment goes down here, where it says balance of down payment. Okay, so again, it helps if you read these a little bit. We spent some time talking about loans and how to deal with that. I'm not going to spend any more time with that. Make sure your numbers add up. If you are using WIN forms or ZIP forms, everything will total nicely for you. So if it says 200,000 or 500,000 up top, it should say 200,000 or 500,000 down at the bottom. Pretty clear stuff. Obviously, we want to get some initials, verification of down payment and closing costs. Okay, that's our proof of funds. Again, the contract says 7 days. Loan applications within 7 days. That's the default. Again, would like to have loan applications done prior to you writing offers. Doesn't always work out that way, but if you're going to be controlling the transaction, you want to be able to have a buyer who has filled out a loan application or at least has spoken with. If they haven't physically sat down and taken the loan application, that's one thing, but at a minimum, we sure as heck want to make sure they're talking to a lender We talked about loan contingencies, and removal of loan contingencies. Generally speaking, representing a buyer, we want to check this box. Loan contingencies remain in effect for the entire trend until the loan is basically funded and closed. Or in this particular closed, can't do that until the loans are funded. Which, by the way, in the lender's world, that's the end of the deal. We have one more step. Loan gets funded. Well, in order for us to get paid and to do the deal, we've got to close it. But so that's why that contingency is removed until the loans are funded. Hey, the lender funded the loan. If for some reason it now doesn't close, which we've had those unfortunate experiences, I've had transactions, too many to count, that the loan actually funded. We were hours away from closing, or the next day away from closing. Something happens, okay? And we basically unfund that, send the money back to the lender. So we talked about contingencies, we talked about no contingencies. Normally you're going to see this on the cash transactions, although you can have a finance deal with no contingencies, okay? You just be careful. If you are going to be that agent who is going to represent a buyer on a cash transaction with no contingencies, then I dropped my iPad mini, I think I cracked it. I sure did. I dropped it in the parking lot coming in here. Shucks. Anyway, if you're going to be that that agent who is representing a buyer on a finance deal with no contingencies, you would better make sure you had had some appropriate conversations with that buyer so they understand exactly what they're committing to. And even more importantly, or as important, make sure you've talked to that buyer's lender.
Thank you.
Okay, are we in good shape here? Appraisal contingencies, again, the normal transaction you're going to run into is going to have appraisal contingencies attached. The default in the contract is 17 days. Again, make sure you're in communication with the lender. The buyer really doesn't know or honestly have much control over that. If you ask your buyer, hey, do you think you can get your appraisal contingency removed in 17 days? They're gonna look at you. You're asking me? Do I think that? Well, I don't know. I mean, I've never done this before. You know, who answers that question? Well, the lender answers that question. Okay, and in some cases, the lender very well may say, well, it's not really completely in my control either. I've got to get it ordered and we got to see what their schedule is. So again, make sure you have those conversations, because if you leave the default in, when you get to day 18 and that appraisal hasn't been done, you're looking at a transaction that potentially is going to be in jeopardy and potentially at risk of being canceled. Okay, we talked about the all cash offers. Again, if you're writing all cash, just make sure you get the appropriate proof of funds and you've got a buyer that's for real. If your cash buyer, or any buyer for that matter, is something other than a traditional Mr. or Mrs. Jones or Mr. Jones or Mrs. Jones, in other words, if it's a corporation, get the corporate documents, make sure you understand that. We spent a fair amount of time, well, buyer stated financing, again, we talked about that. You can't change things midstream. If you told them you were doing a 20% conventional when the offer is accepted, you can't subsequently change that to a FHA offer later on because the buyer just decided to change the program. We talked about our costs. Just leave that be. Just make sure you understand this. By the way, no guessing. Okay? No guessing. This is going to cost you a significant amount of heartache and money if you start guessing in here. Okay? Or frankly, make a mistake. If you don't understand what it means to ask the seller to pay for a well, okay, well then you better understand what that means. Let's use that as one example. I don't want to get hung up on this. Let's do the septic. Maybe that's a little easier for everybody to understand. This report says all we're doing is we're paying for, or we're asking for a report. It doesn't talk about corrections. Okay? So if Johnny's my buyer and I say, hey Johnny, we're going to ask the seller to pay for, have the septic certified. And you're going to make sure that septic's cool. Cleaning, you don't have anything to worry about with that septic. And we check the seller box. Everything's happy. Your understanding, I would think, based upon what I just said, is septic's going to be fine. Well, that is not what this says. All that this says is we're going to have it inspected It's gonna cost $400 or $500. That $400 or $500 may get us a report that says your septic is good to go. That report may come back and say, we've inspected your septic and you have an issue. It's gonna cost $7,000, okay? Your expectation is that's taken care of. The contract says otherwise. The contract says we now have a $7,000 problem. Not necessarily your problem, but it could be your problem if the seller then subsequently says, well, I'm not paying for it. This is how agents get sucked into this deal, because we're the rich guys. We're the ones who are making all this money. Well, you can pay for it. They got your commission. Wow, really? And that happens far too often. Okay, so again, we had a whole bunch of stories we talked about here. So let's, and again, even though during our recap I'm skimming through this, this is the part of the video that we did last week that you really want to go through and watch 2 or 3 times and go through this and read this multiple times on your own. Make sure you understand this. Okay. And by the way, if the first time you are filling out a purchase contract is when you're actually sitting in front of your very first buyer, shame on you. That's not how this works. Read them, fill them out, maybe fill out 3 or 4 different types of offers. Here's a conventional, here's an FHA, here's a cash. Bring them and give them to Steve and say, hey, this is what I was trying to do. I was trying to write an FHA offer for a $250,000 purchase price where the seller was going to pay some closing costs and yada, yada, yada. Did I do that? Okay. We had one that I'll leave the names out to protect the innocent. If you're the listing agent and a buyer and an agent, buyer's agent brings you an offer and the home warranty is not checked and there's nothing in there, leave it be. You don't need to counter back in saying, oh, the home warranty, you forgot the home warranty. Now, they may have forgotten the home warranty, but if you get a contract and it's not required. There's no requirement, legally or otherwise, that the property that sells has to have a home warranty. Okay? So just leave that alone. You'll get fine. So, yeah.
And also, just because it says so in the multiple listing service, you still need to include it in the contract. So in other words, if the listing agent is offering a home warranty, don't just take it for granted, put it in the contract.
Absolutely. Great point, which is why we need to make these meetings a little more interactive. Perfect point. Let's pretend for a moment, and again, this could cause some heartburn, but let's pretend I'm the listing agent and I've written into the listing, seller is offering a home warranty with ABC Home Warranty Company for $450. The buyer's agent fails to put it in the contract. Well, it's not in the contract. No, it's not in there. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. Well, later on, 30 days, you're getting ready to close escrow. Now the buyer's agent realizes that they forgot to put it in. The buyer says, well, I thought I saw something that said that they were offering it. And then you call me up and say, hey, wait a minute, you were offering that. Well, I know, but you didn't ask for it. There was 4 other offers on the property. We just kind of figured that you were like trying to make your offer look better. You weren't asking for that. Maybe the price was negotiated. Whatever it happens to be. It's got to be in writing. It's got to be in writing. And that goes for everything. In the listing it says that the seller is going to leave the whatever. We'll put that in the contract. The whatever to remain. You know, one that I love is and boy, this is a gray area. The creepy crawler cleaner thing for the pool. Okay? Is that a fixture or is that personal property? Well, when it's screwed into the side of the pool and it's creeping and crawling, I think an argument can be made that it's a fixture. But all the rest of the time it's unscrewed, it's kind of laying on the ground, similar to like one of those sweeper things. Well, is the sweeper, and I'm talking the physical, the manual scrub brush, is that a fixture or is that personal property? Well, to me that's personal property. But a lot of buyers, you sell a house with a pool and they get there and they say, hey, where'd my scrub brush go? And where's my scooper net? Oh, and where's that creepy crawler? Well, the seller's mind is, well, the seller is moving into a house that has a pool. And they just bought that new scrub brush, and they just bought that new leaf net. And in their mind, that creepy crawler is not a fixture because it goes in and out. You know, they plug it in, they take it out, like a vacuum cleaner. So at any rate, clarify though, and I don't know the answer to that. Someone may have an opinion as to whether that creepy crawler is a fixture or not. I don't know. I don't want to litigate it. That's why I just want to write it down. Creepy crawler to stay. Right? Because I don't want to have to buy a creepy crawler. Because some of them are expensive. Who owns a creepy crawler? You guys know what I'm talking about, I hope, right?
You might want to indicate something like the pool creepy crawler.
Right, the creepy crawler is the thing that goes around the
Sound
bottom
like
of
a
the
kid?
pool and it sucks up the stuff. Okay, so anyway, this, if not done well, the entire thing, but specifically the bottom of page 2, will jump right into your wallet and start taking money if you don't fill it out right. Okay, so here we go. That was pretty good. That was about a 5-6 minute recap. So let's we will finish the next 6 pages. All right. So here we are, top of page 3, closing in possession. Very simple, yet fraught with danger. Okay. Now again, we're going to take a look at this initially from the perspective of the buyer and the agent writing the offer for the buyer. The default. Well, first of all, we have to decide, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, is this your primary residence? Or are you going to rent it out? Very simple question, right? Well, the default is it's owner occupied. Buyer intends, forget this, to occupy the property. So that if you don't check the box, it's understood that they're occupying the property. Is this important? Yes. Now the reality is most of the time the seller could care less whether the buyer's occupying or not. This is important for the lender and the type of financing that the buyer can obtain. Buyers, by the way, investors of sorts, small investors or large investors, sometimes tend to want to fudge this a little bit. That's called, fudging is a polite word for fraud, okay? We do not participate in any way, shape, or form in our sellers or buyers committing fraud. So if you have a buyer that you've been showing this property to, you've been showing them property for weeks, and the whole, from day one, the entire intent of your conversation, or the entire, basis of your conversation is you're looking for rental property. They're going to rent this house out, rent that house out. Now you finally find them their investment property. You're sitting down the right there. You don't even ask them. You just check the box because they told you for the last 3 weeks that it's an investment property. And then they're like, oh, wait a minute. I'm going to buy this as an owner occupied because I want to get an FHA loan. FHA 3%, you're not going to get it. What they are asking you to do, and they may not even realize it, although they do, they're asking you to commit fraud. You can't do that. Oh man, really? Why didn't you just, if you wanted to commit fraud, why did you tell me about it? Why don't you just tell me for the last 3 weeks that you're going to do an owner occupant? Then I can do this. I don't have knowledge of you committing fraud and I can proceed accordingly. Right? Which again, if you don't have knowledge, it may sound like I'm asking you to stick your head in the sand. Most of us, the thing is when your head's in the sand, you don't realize your head's in the sand. The problem is, are you following me? You can't intentionally stick your head in the sand. If it's there because you haven't been disclosed, you're okay. You are protected, so to speak. If you purposely put your head in the sand, you're screwed. Okay? So at any rate, it is important. And again, don't lie for your buyers. It's one deal. You have a real estate career you're trying to preserve here. It's not one deal. Okay? It's okay to walk away from one deal. Okay, seller occupied or vacant. Again, they're asking the question, who's in the property? Let's deal with the easy one first. If the house is vacant, in theory, I said easy, can be complicated, but in theory, if the house is vacant, you deliver possession normally 5 p.m. This is bracketed. Because this is bracketed and this box isn't checked, that doesn't apply. So the default is 5 p.m. on the date of close of escrow. It's a vacant house, we close escrow today. We get confirmation of recording, hopefully before 5. Hey, it's recorded, which by the way, that confirmation of recording, for those of you that are new, that means something, okay? Confirmation of recording means that the title company has communicated to the escrow company that the deed is recorded. They're confirming the recording of the grant deed. Then normally after the escrow company gets that communication, they communicate to the agents. Hey, listing agent. Hey, buyer's agent. We are confirmed. It's a little bit of back lingo that if you're brand new, you may not understand exactly the vernacular that we're using. So when you hear people screaming across the office, are we confirmed on Main Street? They're asking is, has title company confirmed that the escrow is physically closed, meaning did the grant deed get recorded. Until that happens, we still have an ongoing escrow. So at any rate, it closes today at 5 o'clock, we give them possession. Now, let's suppose we have confirmation of recording right now, and it's 3 o'clock. Everybody knows we're confirmed. Is there any harm in giving them the keys, or do we have to wait until 5 o'clock? And contractually, I suppose, you wait until 5. Nobody does that. Standard of practice is, hey, we got recording this morning, okay? I know we're not supposed to give you the keys until 5. Bam, there's the keys. I have no problem with that. Because who owns the house? The person you just gave the keys to, okay? Now, the exact opposite is true. We never, did I say never?
No.
Provide keys to buyers prior to confirmation of the actual recording. Let me give you a really terrible example, but a true one. Property is vacant. This is why it's important to have a good escrow company and a good title company. Let's pretend it's Friday and we're supposed to close. Loan's funded, as far as we know, buyer's agent, seller's agent, we are ready. It's sent down for recording and everybody's excited. Seller wants to get their check and know that it's closed, and buyer wants to get possession because they actually want to move in this weekend, right? And, you know, we've been calling escrow and calling, hey, no one's calling us back. We haven't got confirmation yet. We email our escrow officer, we email title. Maybe there's a holiday, so maybe this is around the Christmas holiday or people are taking vacation. And bottom line is, it's now the end of the day. We think we recorded and we're confirmed.
Don't think.
We've been told, oh, it's been sent down to the recorder's office, we're just waiting on confirmation. But for whatever reason, we don't have any actual communication from title or escrow that actually happened. We don't have confirmation. Do we give keys to the buyer?
No.
We don't give keys to the buyer. Is the buyer going to be upset?
Mm.
Rightfully so, possibly. And depending on they may not, it'd be no big deal, but what if they got the moving van? Has anybody ever had a client on close of escrow day with a moving van parked out in the parking lot?
We sat out in the parking lot.
And have you ever had the pleasure of going out and telling them that, I know you've got a moving van and I see those 3 other cars over there, those are your buddies that are gonna help you move today, right? I can't give you the keys. Why not? Because we didn't get confirmation. Why not? Doesn't matter. We didn't get confirmation. Okay? You can't move in. Well, can I move into the garage? No.
Also had one though where buyers were supposed to get the keys and the seller hadn't packed them.
There,
yet.
that's a whole nother story. That creates just as many
Oh,
challenges.
yeah.
So anyway, we could go on literally for hours on different examples with this, but let me just give you the basics. Nobody gets keys until escrow is confirmed, okay? So on vacant properties, the standard is 5 p.m. on the day of escrow closes. On occupied properties, normally we kind of do the 3 days after close of escrow. That's a fairly traditional accepted practice, but totally negotiable. So you can make it 5 days. You can make it 1 day. But generally speaking, what you would do is you would put in here, you could leave it at 5 p.m. On close of escrow, or put in a date. And again, I don't like this. I would prefer a date. 5 p.m. on September 29th, whatever it happens to, you know. And again, most people understand when you start counting, or no later than 3 days after close of escrow. Again, I get worried. Well, what does that mean? 3 days, when do we start counting? Let's suppose we close on Friday. So when is the 3rd day at 5 p.m.? 3rd day after close of escrow, when is that?
Wednesday.
Well, you're not counting weekends. Oh, look at you, fancy pants. Okay, so once,
You
so
taught me to
Debbie,
go to the definition.
Debbie says Wednesday at 5 p.m. Anybody have a different answer? Anybody think it's Sunday at 5 p.m.? All depends on when you start counting, right?
Mhm.
Okay, Debbie says Wednesday, which to me means Debbie did not count. Let's pretend today's Friday. Debbie did not count today. Debbie did not count Saturday and Sunday. Debbie counted Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 5 p.m. Since nobody's brave, let's pretend I think Well, that means I count today, Friday, Saturday, Sunday at 5 p.m. I get to move in this weekend. Or maybe Johnny says, well, it says after, so instead of waiting until Monday, I think I'm going to count all days. So Johnny counts Saturday, Sunday, Monday at 5 p.m. There's 3 different people in here with 3 different answers. Now, let's do what Debbie said. Let's go do a definition. What are we looking at? No later than 3 days after close of escrow. I don't know if you guys have looked at this, and hopefully most of you have. Because we're not the smartest group. Where's the definitions at? Here we go. Let's start defining some things. Days. Days means calendar days. Oops, Debbie. Days does not, calendar days, maybe we should define calendar days. Is it to define calendar days? Okay, calendar days to me means if it's on the calendar, it's a day. It doesn't say calendar days not counting weekends or only business days. Days means calendar days. However, after acceptance, the last day to perform any act, I'm not even going to get into that. Oh, wait a minute, shall not, oh, wait a minute. What do we got here?
Should not include Saturdays and Sundays.
The last day of performance of other act of the agreement, including the close of business, shall not include Saturday, Sunday, or legally holidays.
But then go down to
But
days after.
this is, however, after acceptance, the last day. Okay, now let's start talking about, what's the other thing? After, isn't there somewhere it
Days
says?
after, or letter after.
Ah, days after. Means the specified number of calendar days after the occurrence of the event specified, not counting the calendar date on which the specified event occurs.
Monday at 5.
Monday at 5.
Right.
Now, but this
Not
is the
at
problem.
3.
This is the problem. Why do we torture ourselves? Why do we torture ourselves? Now, I know, now there's a reason that we do 3 days after close of escrow. We use the date. Now, this is the deal. Let's pretend on page 1, and this becomes a problem. Let's pretend on page 1, we said we're closing whatever this date is. Friday, September 27th. Well, then down here, and again, you don't want to have it full. You want to get it. And frankly, Monday at 5 kind of sucks, man. I lost the whole weekend to move in. I wanted to get some stuff in. Just put a date in here. I want possession on Sunday at 5, or Sunday at noon, or Sunday at 6 a.m. Whatever, whatever. Let's be clear. Now, you wait a minute, but wait. Then escrow doesn't close on time. Now what do? Well, if escrow doesn't close on time, you have to address it. And then you have to basically draw an amendment that says, okay, we didn't close on Friday. Now we're going to, which is why agents like to do the no later than 3 days after close of escrow, because then it kind of makes it easier for us. And that's fine. I will, to be completely honest with you, in the transaction I do, 95% of them have, well, they're either vacant or they have this. We just say it's 3 days after close. In any case, what's important for you is for you to explain to your client what that means. This means you're going to get keys Monday at 5. And don't assume that the listing agent is on the same page as you. Hey, William, I think you're new. You understand I need possession Monday at 5. Because you may say, well, no, it's Wednesday at 5. No. Now, you also may say, oh, I told my seller it was Sunday at 5 because I 3 days. You're right, never mind. Sunday at 5 is better because I just got an extra day. At any rate, clarify, communicate. All right, so we've got our close of escrow. We've got it scheduled. I can give you 1,000 other examples as it relates to sellers who don't move out, escrows that get extended, all sorts of worrisome stuff. But let's just deal with the basics. The basics are identify when you're going to get possession. And again, going back to looking at your calendar, when did you set this thing up to close? What's the expectation for the buyer? Some buyers are on a tremendous time schedule. Others are not. Okay, the ones who are not on a tremendous time schedule, oh, the pressure's off a little bit. It doesn't matter if it closes Friday, it's not a big deal. Others, again, will have their moving van in your parking lot. Oh, by the way, who gets to pay for their hotel?
Oh, you do.
Who gets to pay to reschedule a moving van? Who gets to pay for the storage? I took time off work. Who's going to compensate? You, Lance, because you're the one making the money. Well, where in the contract does it say? Well, contractually, it doesn't say that anywhere. But if I'm the one who made the mistake, If I'm the one who told him to go get the moving, which is all, by the way, is also very challenging. You know, you're representing a buyer or a seller. Doesn't matter who you're representing. Let's just pretend today's Tuesday. And let's also pretend we're supposed to close on Friday, so we got 3.5, 4 days prior to close of escrow. And the buyer's like, I gotta get my moving van. And I'm like, sellers, I gotta get my moving van. And you know, I'm ready to go. And what do you think, Lance? If everything goes perfect, yeah. What do you mean? The buyer's hasn't signed the loan docs yet. They're supposed to sign tonight. The lender has enough time. If they get this thing funded, they're gonna get looked up. They said they're gonna fund it either Wednesday or Thursday. I hope they fund it Wednesday, because that gives us time to get everything done. If everything goes perfect, yeah, get that moving van. That's not very comforting to the client. What do you mean, Lance? What I mean is this: if I tell you to go get your moving van right now, and something happens, what's going to happen? I don't know. I can give you 1,000 examples. If something happens between now and close of escrow on Friday, you need to understand, only good escrow is what? A closed escrow. The only good escrow is a closed escrow. Terrible things happen. People die. People die the day before close of escrow. That can cause a problem. Lance, you told me. I know, but the buyer died yesterday. We're not buying the house. But I have a moving van. Okay, let's put this in perspective a little. And by the way, people don't put stuff in perspective. They could care less about the fact that the buyer just died. It's all about them. I have a moving van. This cost me $2,000. I know, but the buyer died. Still, Lance, it's your fault. Anyway, be careful with this stuff. And by the way, you're not always going to be able to give your clients the answer they want. Clients want certainty. There is nothing about these transactions. I don't care if it's a cash deal. All the money's in escrow. Now, am I a little bit more comfortable saying, okay, we're going to close Friday. It's a cash deal. Today's Tuesday. All the money's in escrow. We have plenty of time to get this thing done. Go order your truck. I think we're fine. But I'm telling you, William, the only good escrow is a closed escrow. Could something happen between now and then? Yes. Maybe a big IRS lien comes in at the very last minute and title comes in and says, oh, time out. These guys, these funds have been frozen. We can't do this. Time, what? We've had cash in escrow. You know? Well, we should have closed yesterday because the IRS thing came in today. We closed yesterday. Only good escrow is a closed escrow. Now the IRS gets to deal with that buyer. So be careful with this. Let me give you, anybody ever sell a house that's tenant occupied? Okay, lots of danger. It doesn't have to be dangerous, but it can be dangerous. This is very typical, especially in this marketplace. There's a lot of investors out there, and frankly, a lot of investors who own rental property, who now have seen values go up and said, hey, I think I want to sell my rental property, but it already has a tenant in there. That's okay. Number one, let's just make sure that the buyer understands that the property is tenant occupied. Now, if the property is tenant occupied and the buyer wants it to remain tenant occupied, then fine. Okay, that's good. You can deal with that. And this will not apply, actually, because this says we want the property to be vacated 5 days prior to close. So if we don't want the property to be vacated prior to close, then you need to make it clear in writing, and you also want to get a rental agreement in place with the tenant and the new buyer as to what the terms and conditions are. Some very common mistakes on, let's deal with one of them first. Let's suppose we have a buyer who wants to take the property occupied by a tenant. A couple of very common mistakes, and this will cost you money. I've been doing sales for my whole life, property management for my whole life, 27 years in real estate. I've made this mistake, and I've made this mistake as recently as within the last year. And I know better. You get excited, you get things rolling, you put the deal together, and you forget to deal with the proration of rents and the proration of deposits. Which, by the way, is covered elsewhere in the contract, but you forget to deal with it in escrow. Which means, now you've closed escrow. Today's the 26th of the month, okay? Let's assume the tenant paid their September rent, and we close escrow today. Who got the 30 days worth of rent? The seller got the money. Who's entitled to 4 days worth of rent?
Buyer.
The buyer. that needs to be prorated and dealt with in escrow. Buyer gets a credit, hey, here's your 4 days worth of rent. Let's suppose we've got a $2,000 security deposit. Who has that right now? Seller. We close escrow today. What is the proper way to get that to the buyer? Credit through close of escrow. The proper way is to have language in here that says, oh, there is a $2,000 deposit. Mr. Buyer, you're going to be assuming the tenant in possession. There's a deposit. It's going to be credited to the buyer through close of escrow. That's the proper way. Where I made my most recent mistake, we didn't do it in escrow. It is amazing how the nicest, most upright, you pick any religion, people will not do the right thing when it comes to money. Oh, Michael, ugh. I've known Michael for 20 years. I've been managing his property for 20 years. He's a great guy. I love the guy. Michael, oh crud, I made a mistake. We closed escrow on your house yesterday, and we forgot to properly credit the buyer with the security deposit, which you have, the $2,000. I made a mistake. By the way, we talked about this. Remember when we talked about this a couple months ago, how we were going to handle this, and you were? Anyway, I made a mistake. I need you to cut a check payable to Mr. and Mrs. Buyer for $2,000 to give them the security deposit back. Right? And he tells me what?
Back sand,
Pound sand.
pump sand,
Tack sand, pound sand,
whatever it is,
go to hell.
pay for it.
Happens. The nicest people in the world have disappeared, never to return your phone call. Never, yeah. Lance made a lot of money on that deal. He can pay for it. Which, by the way, who pays for that?
Agent.
My mistake. Now, contractually, it does talk about prorating deposits in here. The buyer, in most cases, could sue Michael and win. But if you're representing the buyer, or the seller for that matter, litigation is really, truly not an option. Okay, we don't want that to be a course of action. If I participated in that mistake, I need to own it, which means I may be writing that check. So be very, very careful with that. If you also have tenant-occupied properties where the tenant is moving out, and the buyer is taking possession to move into it, boy, I tell you, this sure can be a challenging one right here. Getting the tenant out exactly 5 days, or at least 5 days prior to close of escrow. And frankly, sometimes the worst enemy on this is not the tenant. Sometimes your worst enemy on this is the seller. So I said, okay, we just accept it. Again, think about how dangerous this is, guys. This is why it cracks me up. Oh, real estate's so easy. Oh, you guys are overpaid. Are you real? Do you realize how much knowledge it takes to successfully go through one of these transactions? It's tremendous. You know, here we've got a new gentleman here in our office. Is any of this covered in the real estate exam?
Actually, some of it's not. Some really important things.
Most of it's not.
Are not.
Most of it's not. I didn't talk about this. Okay, so let's go through this example. I'm the agent, Debbie's my seller, Steve's the buyer's agent, and Johnny's his buyer. Johnny wants to buy the house vacant. The house is currently occupied. You've written the contract with a 45-day close of escrow. We've accepted it, right? We're cool. Debbie, we're going to close escrow in 45 days. And the tenant has to go. Okay, well, what do we need to do? What do we need to do?
Get the tenant out.
We need to give, so how do we get them out? We gotta give them notice, right?
Mhm.
Well, wait a minute. So I don't do property management, I don't know. So Debbie refers me over to the property manager, and the property manager, I say, hey, we gotta get this tenant out, we're gonna close escrow in 45 days. Property manager says, oh, well, that's nice. This tenant's been there for 4 years, and you gotta give them a minimum of a 60-day notice.
Oops, no problem.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, wait a minute, I'm paying you 6% commission to know this. Well, I just didn't know that. Okay? If the tenant's been there for less than 12 months, you can give them 30 days. You think that might be something important to figure out? Also, what happens if the tenant says, F you, I ain't moving, evict me, I've been here for a long time. Well, we got a little problem. This all has to be dealt with. And again, sometimes the sellers can be your worst enemy because they want to give tenant, instead of giving, let's just pretend this is a simple deal. And the tenant can get out in 30 days. They've been there for less than a year. A 30-day notice is appropriate. We've agreed to a 45-day escrow. So I go to Debbie, Debbie says, okay, I don't want you to give them the 30-day notice. Let's wait 10 more days. That's gonna give us 35 days before we're gonna close. We're gonna give them a 30-day notice on that day. That means they're gonna move out on day, and why does Debbie wanna do that? Because Debbie wants to collect
Right.
additional rent for those extra 10 days. Really?
Yeah, Mount Green.
Really? You crazy? So
Risk
anyway,
taker.
all of these things are important, and we haven't even talked about rent control, okay? So this stuff is, I tell you, this is super, super duper important. Now again, we talked about tenant in possession, use the PAA, which is the Property Amendment Agreement, or whatever it happens to be. And by the way, this is fantastic. And this, by the way, you use the PAA form not only with tenants remaining in possession, you could have a owner remaining in possession. Sometimes that happens. Up here, we said the owner's gonna be out in 4 or 5 days, 3 days. Well, is there a case where you could say, I wanna close escrow, but the owner, not the tenant, the owner of the property needs to stay for a month? That could be terms that are agreeable to the buyer. That could be something that you guys could negotiate. Well, if you're gonna do that, you could do a PAA with the owner. The owner remaining in possession. Because by the way, what does the owner become after close of escrow? They become the tenant. Okay? Okay, we could go on for days. Close of escrow, seller assigns to buyer any assignable warranties, whatever you may have. At close of escrow, unless otherwise agreed in writing, seller shall provide keys to everything. I've got a caffeine addiction, guys. My girls know me really well. Thank you. Nothing like an ice cold Dr. Pepper. Brighten up the training class. Anyway, so again, you know how many times I paid to have a garage door rekeyed? A bunch. Because the garage door is not keyed the same as the front door. We're supposed to deliver all keys to all locks. You call the seller and say, hey dude, I didn't get the key to the garage door from the house to the garage. Oh geez, I haven't locked that in 20 years. I don't know where that key is. We never lock that door. We only have the key to the front door. Really? Now again, some buyers they're cool with that. Other buyers are not cool with that. Okay? We're going to do a class on net sheets earlier, and we'll put it in perspective with keys and locks. True story, guys. True story. Very old story, but true story. 20 plus years ago, back in the days when we used to have to fill out net sheets by hand, a little calculator, but we filled them out by hand.
Yeah.
Gave a net sheet to a seller. I had my pad, I had everything in there that I thought was good. Close of escrow came, and my net sheet was $50 light. I told them they were going to get $100,000, and they got $99,950. I did everything right for these people. Thought I had a great relationship with these people. Well, guess what?
$50.
They wanted $50.
They did, yeah.
That's called Tyler up.
Not kidding. Not kidding. Now, having said that, at what point does that become reasonable? And we all kind of laughed at that. Really? You want $50? Okay, what if it was $500? What if it was $5,000? At some point, our reaction to that story changes. Okay? Let's all agree that if I missed it by $5,000, that we all might sit back and say, whoa, yeah, hey Lance, that's not right. You better pay him the $5,000 out of your commission, right? Can we agree that? Now, at $50, we're kind of like, really? Now, for them, their threshold was anything less than what I told them. Anything less than what I told them was not appropriate. They wanted to be paid. Now, we can laugh at $50, but at any rate, got to get all that covered. So you can apply that to all sorts of things. Delivering keys, delivering pool equipment, ceiling fans missing. What? The ceiling fan? Hey, ceiling fan's gone. I want money. Pay me. Okay, we can go crazy. All right, so we're gonna blow past that. Oh, well, almost. Homeowners Association keys, Homeowners Association membership cards, privilege cards. Depending on the association, the seller doesn't turn those in. Those could cost $100 each. they've got 4 people in the family, 4 ID cards, maybe they had 4 keys, for $800. Right? We didn't get that. Well, it says right here, that has to be taken care of. Oh, jeez, I didn't read it. I didn't know the damn thing was in a homeowners association. Be careful. Okay, statutory disclosures, including lead-based paint, hazard disclosures, yada, yada, yada. Okay, there are statutory disclosures. Statutory meaning that these disclosures are required by the law. These disclosures, you cannot waive them. Even on a cash deal, the buyer and seller cannot agree that we're just not going to deal with these disclosures. By law, seller shall within the time specified in paragraph 14A, remember 14A, because the time specified in paragraph 14A is important for a whole bunch of things. Okay, this is one of them. The seller has to deliver to the buyer, if required by law, federal lead-based paint disclosure, and the pamphlet, this is that booklet thing that we see so much about. Disclosures and notice required by section da-da-da-da to the Civil Code section da-da-da-da. Statutory disclosures included are not limited to the granddaddy of them all, real estate transfer disclosure statement, also referred to as the TDS. That's kind of what started this whole thing. The natural hazard disclosure statement. And again, we do a whole class on disclosures, so we'll go into these in much more depth. Anyway, we got to give them disclosures, yada, 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 yada. Okay? Everything that we're required to give them. Buyer shall, within the time specified in paragraph 14B1, 14A says seller needs to give them to you by X amount of date. 14B1 says buyer has to return them by whatever date it is, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Sign copies of the statutory and lead disclosures. In the event seller prior to close of escrow becomes aware of adverse conditions materially affecting the property. I love that. Conditions materially affecting the property. Conditions materially affecting the property. Conditions materially affecting the property. 5 really important words. You need to remember those. Or anything that's inaccurate in the disclosures, they have a duty to disclose that. So they give them a disclosure that says X, transfer disclosure statement. Transfer disclosure statement, the seller fills out and says, to my knowledge, the roof is good. Going to close escrow 30 days from now. It rains. Oops, roof's leaking. Conditions materially affecting the property. Has something changed? They told the buyer a couple weeks ago the roof was fine, which it was. But no evidence. I mean, it wasn't new. No evidence of roof leak. Now it's rained. Oops, shoot. So of course, what you do when something like that happens, you go to Home Depot, you get some paint, you paint over the stain. And, did I just say that on tape?
Yeah, you did.
Of course you don't do that. You disclose to the buyer, we now have a new issue that needs to be resolved, or to their agent, the appropriate person. And you address that, which may include fixing it, maybe not. Maybe you have to renegotiate something, who knows? Okay, but something's changed. Okay, so we're going to give them the TDS. Again, the event seller becomes aware of conditions. Everything is, oh, by the way, it's got to be done in writing, put it in writing. You can amend these disclosures, by the way. You can amend the TDS. Oh, something's changed. Okay, this is what's going on. You put all that stuff in writing. And again, we could go for hours about silly examples. If any disclosure or notice specified in paragraph 6A, paragraph 6A1, it's up here, or subsequent or amended disclosures is delivered to the buyer after the offer is signed, buyer shall have the right to cancel this agreement within 3 days. So in other words, if you don't give them the appropriate disclosures, they can cancel. We never gave them a TDS. Buyer has the right to cancel. All right, you got to give them these disclosures. This is not an option. And then again, this is what I was saying earlier. Note to buyer and seller. We're talking specifically to the clients. Waiver of statutory and lead disclosures is prohibited by law. You can't waive it. Right? Especially you can't waive it if you're an agent representing them. Let's suppose it's a cash deal, everything's fine. Buyers and sellers, I don't care about a TDS. And really you don't care. I mean, they really, really don't care. Now you know what the hell, no big deal. Something happens after the fact, people get attorneys, and then they sit back and say, well, my agent said it's no big deal. It's a cash deal. You kind of knew each other. You were family. Cannot waive the disclosure. It's got to be done. Okay. Natural and environmental hazards. Then the time specified in 14A. There it is again. Shall or shall if required by law, which it is, deliver to the buyer the earthquake guidelines. That's the earthquake pamphlet book. Okay, we have earthquakes. Gotta give it to them, okay? That includes all, this pamphlet talks about not only earthquakes though, it talks about flood zones and seismic zones and fire zones and all that sort of stuff. Okay, this is part of our NHD. NHD has just become standard of practice. Nobody gets excited about it at all. You order a natural hazard disclosure, you pay 50 to 125 bucks, the company provides it, and it satisfies paragraph B. It says it's in a flood zone or it's not, it's in a fire zone or it's not, it's in an earthquake zone or it's not. Buyers and sellers sign. By the way, there is a form on WIN forms or in ZIP forms that is the natural hazard disclosures form that you can manually check the boxes and have your buyers and sellers sign. Never, 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 never do we manually go through and check that box. Even if you know the answers. Well, gee, I'm trying to save my client 75 bucks. No. You're not trying to save your client 75 bucks. You are imposing liability. Client's gonna spend the 75 bucks, we're gonna have a company fill out this form, because if something's wrong, we wanna be able to turn to property ID and say, you gave us bad information. We do not wanna be checking boxes. Tax withholding, okay? Very simple. Every single real estate transaction is subject to tax in one form or another. Doesn't mean you owe taxes, but it's subject to tax. We are not tax professionals and we are not attorneys. You need to talk to your tax professional, okay? This specifically refers back to the FERPTA disclosure. We'll spend more time talking about FERPTA when we do the disclosure class. Bottom line is, when I'm talking to clients, buyers or sellers, and tax issues come up, even though I've got a pretty good knowledge of what the tax implications are specific to the transaction, I don't know their situation. I have no idea what they've done. You know, I don't know whether it's like an investment. Did you depreciate it? How much did you depreciate it? Did you improve it? Or were those improvements properly capitalized? I don't know. I'm not a tax guy. Talk to your tax professional and see what the tax implications are. You know, Steve and I were at the Board of Realtors meeting yesterday, and this is something that you guys all should be aware of. It's still uncertain whether the state of California is going to extend the debt forgiveness on a short sale to a seller. And there has been forgiveness on the federal level, and there's been forgiveness on the state level. So in other words, if you had a $100,000 write-off on a short sale, you didn't have to worry about paying income taxes to the feds or the state. Okay, well, the state of California has been kicking this can down the road, and it's still kicked down the road, okay? Well, that could have an implication on a seller doing a short sale. They could now have the possibility of being exposed to California, I know it sounds weird, but income tax on a deficiency on a short sale, okay? And that in itself is a 4-hour class. So, at any rate, we'll go through that more on the disclosures. But, by the way, and by the way, there's no getting around this, by the way. This is required. Sellers fill out FERPTAs. If they don't give all the information, they have to do a QS, which is the qualified substitute. We'll talk about that when we get into the disclosure class. Megan's Law database. This is the registered sex offender database. If you're not familiar with it, I will reluctantly show you what we're talking about. Normally, the general practice or the advice from counsel is don't go here. Leave this, stay away from here. I like to show it for a couple of reasons, because number one, you need to know what it's all about. You can type in, there's a couple different, I'm just going to Google Megan's Law. And Megan, I don't remember her last name, but she was some little girl many years ago that got attacked or something, and they named the law after her. So this is the Californians Megan's Law Directory. It looks just like this. If your clients have a concern or a question, is this property, is there any registered sex offenders in this neighborhood? You send them here. That is not a yes or a no answer. That is, if that's of a concern to you, this is where you go. And by the way, this is the same address. Oops, sorry. This is the same address. It has it on here, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Where is it?
D.
Oh, here we go.
There you go.
Okay. meganslawca.gov. Nobody types in addresses anymore, we always Google it, right? So here we are, yep, meganslaw.ca.gov. By the way, if you saw on the Google, there was a couple other funky little things on there. This is where you need to be. Go down to the bottom, got all sorts of stuff. They won't even let you go into the site until you've read all of the disclosures and you're familiar with it. Okay, now I want to enter. Oops, now I gotta read. Okay? They don't want to get sued by somebody and all the rest of that sort of stuff. Okay, so this is the deal. How does it work? Well, it works a bunch of different ways. You can type in a name. You could have a client that comes to you and says, okay, I just moved here from Sacramento and I moved away because John Jones is a registered nut job and he was in the area and I want to move down here. And they believe, those type of people, by the way, know about this site already. If they've actually had some sort of experience with this and this is a huge concern, they probably go to this. So you can type in a name, you can type in an address, you can type in a city, you can do it by zip code, you can do it by a whole bunch of things. Okay, so let's just do our zip code. Actually, I'll do my zip code in Riverside. I live in 92506, and let's do the map. 92506 is a fairly large zip code in Riverside. It's going to zoom in on me here in a minute. There we go. All those blue little dots this is why I like to do this, because if someone says, I don't care, you can pick the nicest zip code in any city, you're going to have blue dots. I want to move to a place where there are no registered sex nuts. Good luck. Okay? So let's just pretend, let's zoom in here a little bit. Where's my zoom in button? Drag to zoom.
The drag zoom means you're gonna make a box with your.
Oh, is that what I'm gonna do?
Oh, it didn't work.
Alright, well, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna hover over this little blue dot, I'm gonna click on it. Let's just pretend this is our neighbor. There he is. Charlie, whatever.
Wow, you show the picture.
Terrible stuff. Oral copulation with a minor under 40. This will make you sick.
Oh,
This
yeah.
thing will make you sick. Which, by the way, I can say this because I happen to be one of them. 99.9% of these guys are old white guys. I don't know what it is about old white guys. They just tend to be registered sex nuts.
You're old?
I'm getting older. Okay? So,
I just wanted to hear it out.
so there you go. So this is the deal. If you have a client who has this type of concern, this is where you want to send them. Now, we don't normally recommend, hey, I just took a new listing, let me go on and be proactive. Let me go in and check this address and let me see. We don't normally recommend you do that. Because once you do that, now you basically have to kind of do what we just did. Now every time you show the property, you say, okay, well there's one over here, there's one over there, there's one over there. Okay? But that's not normally what ends up happening. Normally what ends up happening is the seller maybe, or a neighbor, or somebody at some point in time tells you, oh, you're holding an open house and the neighbor comes by. Just so you know, whoever you sell this house, you better tell them to look out for Charlie. Now what do you got?
Disclosure, yeah.
You got direct knowledge and it needs to be disclosed. Charlie lives right across the street. Okay? So, be careful with that, be responsible with it, but that's basically what it's all about. I will tell you, it used to be a while ago, this used to actually be a topic of serious discussion with buyers when we were writing offers on houses. I can't remember the last time I had a buyer who expressed any concern over this. It was just kind of sad. I think we've just all become numb to it.
That's it.
You know? Kind of a sad commentary, but again, this used to be it still is a big deal, but it used to be a real big deal. Okay, notice regarding gas or hazardous liquid transmission pipelines. In other words, do you have a natural gas pipeline underneath your house? It's got to be disclosed. Some people don't want to live underneath one of those. Okay? Condominium or planned unit development. This is traditionally referred to as our homeowners association. Okay? Is the property in a homeowners association? I gotta tell you, this is probably one of the most violated paragraphs in the entire purchase contract. Because most people don't change the default. They leave the default. Seller has 7 days to disclose to buyer the property is a condominium, is located in da-da-da-da-da-da. And sometimes they don't even do that. And then they also have to provide, if the property is a condominium or located da-da-da-da, seller has 3 days after acceptance to request this information. They don't request it. They request it 2 days before close of escrow. And then you've got to give it to the buyer. And there's a lot of things on here you're supposed to give them. Oh, we just got to give them a copy of the bylaws and CC&Rs, right? Well, let's read here. Statement containing the location, the number, parking spaces, copies of the 12 months HOA minutes. Who sold a condo and got copies of the minutes from the HOA? Right in the contract.
I'm at fault. I
Okay.
sold a condo that we manage and I
Right.
didn't do it.
Who's done that? Is that's potentially a reason for a buyer to cancel. I didn't get the minutes. Now, why would they want to give them the minutes? Because the minutes might be building to something. Let's say there's going to be a $10,000 special assessment. It's not in place right now, but in the minutes, there's been discussion. We're going to put together a committee regarding the finances of the association. We're going to put together the feasibility of a special assessment. We're going to put together a special committee on the amount of the special assessment. We propose we have passed and approved a special assessment in the amount of $10,000 to take effect January 1. Well, today's September. We close escrow. Buyer has no idea. Well, if the buyer had the minutes, the buyer would know. And in fairness to the seller, a lot of times the seller has no idea what the heck's going on because they don't attend the meetings. They don't read the minutes. So there are all sorts of fun stuff in here when you're selling condos. One of my disclosures to you is this also applies. The condos are the easy ones. It's a condo, okay? The PUDs, areas like Sunapee Ranch, Moreno Valley Ranch, those are kind of the easy ones, you know? It's those little itty bitty pocket associations that you're driving through the neighborhood and you don't even know the darn thing's in a homeowners association. Or a year ago you sold a house on that street, there's no association. Now you're selling a house across the street, well, of course it's not, I just sold that one. Well, guess what? The house across the street is in a homeowners association, the one on that side's not. How come I didn't see any signs? Well, guess what? You got to know what you're selling. Be careful with that. Okay, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. This is kind of my creepy crawler example and such. Items included and excluded from the purchase price. There's an item on the listing agreement when you're taking a listing. It's very clear. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, what stays, what goes. By the way, we don't put fixtures. Just stay. Let's use a ceiling fan. A ceiling fan is a fixture. That stays. So you need to kind of have a little discussion with your seller about those type of, we used the creepy crawler example for the swimming pool earlier, but let's go to one that's maybe a little more common. A lot of sellers may not understand that ceiling fan needs to stay,
Or that chandelier.
or the chandelier.
Yeah.
Okay.
The stuff-
So you need to have those type of conversations. You know, window coverings, that's a fixture. I can't take those blinds with me. I can't take that ceiling fan with me, unless I put in there, ceiling fan excluded from the sales price, mini blinds excluded from the sales price, pool equipment excluded from the sales price. That needs to go in the listing, it probably should go in the MLS, and it needs to go here. There's no misunderstanding. And again, it lists a few of them, but there's some stuff in here that we could argue about that's maybe not. You can't list the contract to be 45 pages long, okay? So know what you're excluding, know what you're including, and covered in the contract. My suggestion, if you have a listing and a seller says, let's use my ceiling fan example, if the seller specifically says, I've got to take the ceiling fan because that's from grandma and it's an heirloom, fine, take it down today, okay? I don't want anybody seeing it. Get rid of it. Anything that you're taking with you, take down now, okay? Just going to make our life so much easier. Okay, this is a continuation. We're now on the top of page 4. Continuation of excluded and excluded, okay? Okay, we're in paragraph 9, condition of property. This is basically the as-is clause. It used to say, actually I take it back, it does again. There was a period of time where they replaced as-is with present condition. probably 5 years ago, and I just missed it, they put as is back in. But this is basically as is. You can sell a property as is. As is sales have kind of got this, oh no, is it still on the test? Any questions about caveat emptor?
Yes.
Buyer beware?
Yes,
Okay, there you go. See, the test, you learned something on the test. Okay, caveat emptor, buyer beware. I don't know what the question is on the test, but I can remember 28 years ago, when I took the test, the thought was, well, there really is no more buyer beware, okay? In other words, kind of the old concept was, the buyer has to do an inspection. I know that there's a problem right there, but I'm selling it as is. I don't have to disclose it, buyer beware. Okay, when they say there is no more as is, buyer beware, what they're saying is you cannot have an as-is transaction where you're failing to disclose material facts.
Pretty much said exactly what the book says.
You can have an as-is transaction as long as you disclose everything, okay? So there's nothing wrong with as-is. The roof is falling down, the foundation is crumbling, there's a gang member across the street, and by the way, I rent to a registered sex offender and he's staying. You like that? Sign right here. As-is sale, full disclosure, legal, perfectly legal, everybody's happy. You just can't have an as-is sale where there's been some sort of a deception or fraud. Okay? So, let's just go through this a little bit. This is another one of those areas that tend to cost us money as realtors. Condition of the property. Unless otherwise agreed, property is sold as in its present condition. What would otherwise agreed mean?
Agreed in writing or something?
Agreed in writing that the buyer or the seller is going to fix something. They're going to remove all the trash on the side of the house. Trash on the side of the house is a physical present condition. Somewhere the buyer and seller have agreed that prior to close of escrow, all of the trash on the side of the house will be removed. Okay? And then whatever other example. So unless it's otherwise agreed in writing, the property's as is. But it's also subject to the buyer's investigation. The buyer may investigate and find something, quite honestly, that the seller didn't know. I did not know that. Okay, well now you get the inspection report, and then what do? You negotiate. Hey, we discovered this. Buyer normally says, I'd like you to fix it. Seller can say, no, I'm going to fix it. I don't have to fix it. I sold it as is. Oh, you didn't tell me that. I didn't know. I'm not going to fix it. They can do that. But the buyer can also say, well, why? I'm not going to buy it. Okay? You don't want to, I didn't know, you didn't know. I'm not buying. You're not going to fix it, I'm not going to buy it. Or that's, again, normally where the negotiation comes in. Or, quite honestly, sometimes that's where we as realtors come in and say, oh, really? Really? You guys are going to blow this deal over a $500 stupid repair? Well, at some point, we may hold our ground, or we may kick in $500 and get the stupid repair done. It just depends. All right, so, as is, seller shall, within the time specified, here we go again, 14A, disclose material facts and defects. That's normally as part of the transfer disclosure statement. B, buyer has the right to inspect. There you go. C, buyer is strongly advised to conduct investigations of the entire property. Seller may not be aware of all defects. Hey, did I just say that? Affecting the property or other factors that buyer considers important. Maybe something that it's just super trivial to me. I didn't realize it was that important to you. Wow, you really put a lot of emphasis on the little barn in the far back of the corner of the house. To be honest with you, I didn't put any value on it at all. It's full of termites and ready to fall down. But the buyer, that was it. That was going to be the man cave. Everything was going to be great. And I didn't realize, again, that was an important thing to you. So, again, some variance of what's important to the buyer and seller. Property improvements may not be built to code. You may not know that. Okay, maybe the maybe the seller bought it. Geez, the room was built when I bought the house. As far as I knew, it was to code. I never checked. Check that stuff out. Buyer's investigation of property and matters affecting the property. Again, you have an opportunity to do it within the time specified in paragraph 14B. Very, very simple. Again, access to all of that sort of stuff. Ah, this is my favorite paragraph. Right here. Who would read this? This is on page 4 in the middle, buried into a boring paragraph. Why would you read paragraph 10? Right? Paragraph 10, it's not important. Let's read, it's a very important sentence. Without seller's prior written consent, buyer shall neither make nor cause to be made invasive or destruction buyer investigation. So in other words, if the buyer wants to investigate, they better have the seller's permission, and if those investigations are invasive or destructive, maybe we have to remove some drywall or we have to look at something, you have to have the seller's permission. I actually like this one better. Let's go back to the beginning of the sentence. Without seller's prior written consent, buyer shall neither make nor, actually, let's stop right there. Without seller's prior written consent, buyer can't do this as well. Inspections, it's hard to read this thing up this close. Inspections by any government building or zoning inspector or government employee unless required by law. Okay, we're in the city of Moreno Valley. There's no point of sale ordinance in the city of Moreno Valley. We can buy and sell real estate. No reason that the city does not get involved. They don't have to inspect, they don't do anything. So, in other words, it's not required by law. The buyer cannot just go out and call building and safety out. Well, I was a little concerned. Really? Yeah. So I called code compliance out. Really? Got a contractual problem. Now, it doesn't change the fact that the city could come out and neighbor or somebody could report something, or they could drive by and all the rest. But now they've come to the property, they've now given the seller a laundry list of items that they need to correct. And the seller's like, what? Excuse me? Getting back to our earlier conversation about the mold. Very brief story, otherwise we will not finish all the time today. I had a property for sale without the seller's permission. The buyer ordered a service master company to go out and do a mold inspection. That mold inspector came out and said, yes, there's mold, it's going to cost $5,000 to remediate. Okay. Didn't have our permission to do that. We can argue whether the remediation bill was accurate or not. That deal dies. What does the seller now have to disclose to the future buyer? We've got this report that says, hey, you know, that's why when you buy a foreclosure property, or as somebody who's sold many foreclosure properties in my time, if the buyer chooses to go out and do a home inspection, I don't want it. Don't send it to me. You can tell me what you found. You can say, I want these items. I don't want a copy of the home inspection. And if you give it to me, say you need to send this to the seller. If I send that disclosure home inspection report to the seller, they'll fire me. What are you doing? Why do you send that to us? We don't want it. Why do they not want it? Because now that they have it, they've got to give it to every buyer down the road. Knowledge, you have to pass it. They don't want that sort of stuff. Saying that we're a little bit ahead of ourselves, but we'll talk about the same context with termite inspections. You order a termite inspection, the seller doesn't like it's going to cost $2,000 to fumigate the property. So I said, give me another bid. That's too much money. Well, you get another inspection. Well, guess what? This one comes back $3,000 to fumigate the property. So of course, what does the seller want? He likes the first one. What do you got to do with the one for $3,000?
Disclose it.
It's got to disclose that. So you got to be careful. So these things don't always work. You know, it's not like you're getting bids for your own consumption and you just pick and choose the one you want. When you're ordering these inspections and now you have knowledge, I've got 4 bids for termite, one for $200, one for $2,500. Well, guess who gets to see all 4 bids? Your buyer. And of course, what does the buyer want? Well, they want the most expensive one because that's got to be the best, right? Got to disclose what you know. Okay, so buyer gets the opportunity to do the inspections. Seller should make the property available. Okay, so what is the seller's responsibility? Seller make the property available. Buyer shall specify 14B, and remember 14A, 14B. They're going to do their inspections, or they're going to remove the contingency, or they're going to cancel. It's fine. Canceling's always an option. They have to give and give the seller at no cost copies. Okay, now again, these are inspections that we've approved. And which obligation shall survive the term? Okay, they gotta give them the agreement. Seller should have the water, gas, gotta have all the utilities on, right? Buyers to indemnify the seller. So in other words, if somebody gets out there, contractor, breaks his ankle climbing on the roof, don't sue me, you ordered him, not me. The contractor can't lien the property. If the buyer was supposed to pay for the inspection, that agreement's between the buyer and seller. Yada, 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 yada. Okay, we're gonna talk a little bit more about inspections when we get to paragraph 14. Seller's disclosures. This is important. I see a lot of people just check all of these. All right, well, make sure they apply. If the property doesn't have a well or a septic, don't check it. The boilerplate is buyer's inspection advisory. It's part of the contract. It has been forever. Technically, it's not part of the contract because the contract's page 1 through 8, but you always got the BIA attached as page 9 and 10 on every single one. Check the appropriate ones. For the most part, you guys don't forget the wood destroying pest of the termite. I see a lot of agents in our office forget that. If you're asking for a termite report and the buyer's expectation is to get a clear inspection, you have to check this box and you have to fill out who's going to pay for it. And we talk about that in our disclosure class. So again, check the appropriate ones. The obvious ones are the short sale, if you're doing a short sale, probate or trust, if that's involved. A lot of people love the seller property questionnaire. Okay, seller property questionnaire and the supplemental contract disclosure, very, very repetitive. A lot of the questions are just, they're really the exact same questions and they're just a supplement to the transfer disclosure. Again, if you're using an addendum, check the box and give it a number. Addendum 1, addendum 2, addendum 5, whatever it happens to. If it's an REO, there you go. The popular ones, by the way, none of these are required in our office. We do not require these, but what a lot of agents seem to be doing, seller property questionnaire and the SBSA. Okay? I'm okay with that. We don't have a problem. They're very, very, very redundant though. Okay, title investing. This is kind of the typical, number one, if you're the seller, you have to have the legal authority to sell. And if you're the buyer, you have to have the ability to buy. Okay, can we deliver clear title, Mr. and Mrs. Seller? And buyer, can you take vesting? Can you basically own the property? Is there a reason why you can't? Things like, I used to give you credit when we haven't talked about child support liens. Well, guess what? You have a little problem buying or selling property if you've got unpaid child support. Got to get that dealt with. You either got to get it paid and squared. Not that you can't buy a house or sell a house if you are paying child support, that's fine. But if you are sideways with the district attorney in whatever county and you're behind or something, or you've missed court dates or you're in trouble, guess what? That comes up. That's all part of the title investing issue. They check all that stuff out. So again, seller obviously has to have their encumbrances taken care of, all the rest of that. Buyer has to be able to achieve appropriate title without any issues specifically with them. You've got to know who they are, husband and wife. Are they single people buying it? Is only going to take title without his wife or without the husband, or whatever it happens to be. So you need to keep a close eye on that. We're right on schedule. Buyer shall receive a CLTA and an ALT homeowners policy, covering the covering the buyer, covering the lender. Okay, so those are all in here. These we talked about on page 2, under who's paying for what. Okay, so that's what they're going to receive. Okay, top of page 5, sale of buyer's property. Okay, if you are going to write a contract subject to the successful close of escrow of the buyer's house, this is where you would do it. You have to check the box. The assumption is it is not subject to the sale of the buyer's property. This particular paragraph has not been checked for years up until recently. This is starting to become back in vogue. The buyers or the sellers are starting to feel empowered. Sure, I'll sell, I'm going to buy. Having said that, if you've got this box checked and you've got multiple offers up against you, good luck. Okay, very good luck. But again, if that is absolutely, positively a must. I cannot buy this house until I sell my other house, you'd better check that box. But again, in this market, good luck. Okay, here we are. We finally made it to paragraph 14, page 5. Time periods, removal of contingency, calculation, yada, yada, yada. Okay, the default for the seller, unless you check the box and change it, is 7 days after acceptance to deliver reports, disclosures, and everything we've talked about in paragraph 4, 6A, 6B, 6C, 7A, 9A, 11, all of that stuff has to be delivered to the buyer within 7 days unless we extend that. Just give you one of those examples is termite inspection. I would venture a guess that 95% of all real estate transactions where a termite inspection is agreed to by the buyer and seller, that termite inspection is not given to the seller, not given to the buyer within 7 days. Is that a cause for the buyer to cancel? Yes, along with all of these other things. So, the moral of the story is simple. If you cannot deliver these things within 7 days, check the box and give yourself more time. Association documents, whatever it happens to be. I may need 15 days, I may need 30 days. Okay? But give yourself more time. Buyer has 17 days after acceptance, and other guys agreed in writing, to do the inspections that they've said they want to do. So if the buyer's going to do a home inspection or this or that or all of the things that the buyer has agreed to do, they need to get it done within the 17-day window, or again, if that's not enough time, check the box and put in the appropriate number of days. Okay? Now some of the stuff that they need to do is also predicated upon the receipt of those documents from the seller. So the buyer can't do certain things until they get it. So all these timelines are so important. And to be honest with you, from day one in my real estate career, it seems as though real estate agents are oblivious to this. It just seems to be so little emphasis put on these deadlines. Oh, gee, really? Oh yeah, I guess I should have ordered that appraisal. No, guys, have you read the contract? It is countless number of times where we've contacted the buyer's agent basically saying, hey, how are we doing with that appraisal? You're getting close on your 17-day window. Only to be told, not only is the appraisal not done, it hasn't even been ordered. Countless number of times. Okay, so again, I'm oversimplifying this, but read it, number one. 7 days for the seller to deliver items, 17 days for the buyer to basically go through and complete their inspections and do all the rest of that. The items that are contained within all of those little paragraphs that we've already discussed. Okay, let's get down to not that this paragraph A and B aren't important, because they are, but let's get down to the paragraph C on the right to cancel. So here we go. We've had timelines to do things. The seller has the right to cancel, on buyer contingencies. If by the time specified in the agreement, buyer does not deliver seller the removal of applicable contingencies or cancellation agreement, then the seller first has to deliver, which by the way, this random, I'm canceling. It's not what the contract says. The contract says we have to deliver to the buyer a notice to the buyer to perform. You can't just say I'm canceling. You can, but first you have to deliver to the buyer a notice to buyer to perform. The NDP may cancel it in the event seller is authorized to return. We'll go for that a little bit later. But basically, let's just say the contingency is not met. Okay, the appraisal contingency is not met. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, 17 days is up. We're requesting you remove the appraisal contingency or cancel the deal. If you don't remove it or cancel the deal, we're going to cancel the deal. And you have to do that for all of the contingencies. Okay? Not just the appraisal, it's the loan contingency, the disclosure contingencies, blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
I'm not sure when it changed. It used to be that contingency removal was passive,
Passive.
which meant that when the time period elapsed, the contingency was removed.
Yep. Automatically, nobody had to do anything.
But it's been changed.
Active.
Yeah, so now it's an active removal of contingencies. So even though the time period has elapsed, the contingency is not automatically removed. You have to actually have the party, whether it's a buyer or seller, sign that they're removing that contingency.
Right. Exactly. And you know what, and I know why they did the active removal. I liked it the other way. Because, and the reason I liked it the other way, because it now requires us, number one, to remove the contingencies in writing. It also requires us to send, and by the way, this notice to perform goes both ways, okay? There's a notice of seller to perform. Hey, we haven't given me a TDS. Give it to me, okay? Or, you know, you haven't completed whatever the seller agreed to complete. Do it, or I'm canceling. But it is very active, and the problem why I don't like it is because, to be honest with you, we get lazy.
Yep.
We as professionals, I guess that those two words kind of are in conflict, but we are lazy. Realtors get lazy, they don't do this. And not only do we not do what we're supposed to do within the specified period of time, then we don't send the notice of buyer to perform. And then we don't cancel. And then we wonder why we get buyers and sellers that are upset with us. Because sometimes they actually read the contract. They're like, oh, it sounds like we were supposed to do something 2 weeks ago. Lance, did you do that? Hey, you are my realtor. Oh, no, I didn't do that. Why not? I never do that. Oh, okay. All right, so be careful. So at any rate, so we've got the right to cancel by the seller, the right to cancel contract obligations, okay? The contract obligations are other items. You've got the contingencies, but there's other things that we've agreed to do. We've agreed to provide things. For example, they're obligated to give me a proof of funds. All right, that says in the contract, you will give me proof of funds. Well, you haven't done that, bless you. Well, that's a contract obligation. Close of escrow. You said you were going to close escrow on this date. Well, now, that's what you'll, if you ever call me up and you have a problem with that escrow, if you ever hear me use the terms, you're out of contract, this is what I'm talking about, okay? You can forget about who is right and who is wrong. You're out of contract. Escrow date, for example, close of escrow date has come and gone. Okay, well, irrespective of whose fault that is, you're out of the contract. Something needs to be done to get you back under contract. What normally that something means is, let's get an addendum, let's agree on whatever you're disputing, and let's put a new close of escrow date and extend it out. Because once you become out of contract, then depending upon who you are, you could be in all sorts of peril. Okay, buyer, seller, or agent for that matter. Okay, so again, seller's right to cancel under contract obligations. Seller, after first delivering to buyer a notice of buyer to perform, may cancel the agreement for any of the following reasons. Buyer fails to deposit funds, earnest money deposit, happens all the time, okay? Funds are deposited in it, buyer fails to deliver notice, FHA, VA cost is required. Buyer fails to deliver letter required by H3, which I think is proof of funds. Buyer fails to deliver verification required by 3G, by 3J. Seller reasonably disapproves of the verification. And okay, just go through. I don't have these all memorized, but you got to know what all these are. Okay. And then again, this is a tough one. So if seller reasonably disapproves, well, is the seller being reasonable or not? Let's just pretend we're talking proof of funds. Well, I've never heard of this bank before. Well, just because you've never heard of them doesn't mean that it's not a valid proof of funds. Okay, so that may or may not be a valid reason or a reasonable disapproval. Buyer fails to return statutory disclosures. Buyer fails to assign liquidated damages. Yada, yada, yada. Notice to buyer to perform. The notice of buyer to perform shall be in writing. There's a carved form for it. Bless you.
Thank you.
Very simple. It has to be signed by the seller. And you, again, the contract is give buyer, at least if you were wondering earlier how much time, it's in the contract. You have to give the buyer at least 2 days to perform. So the example I gave you earlier is like, well, wait a minute, you didn't say how long they have to do it. Depends on what your contract says. The default is 2 days. Maybe that's too long, 1 day. You can change it. Check the box, 1 day. Check the box, 4 days. Whatever you guys agree on. By the way, 99% of the contracts, I would say 99.9% of the contracts, nobody changes this. The default is 2 days.
Never seen it changed.
So you got 2 days to perform. So when you do deliver that notice to perform, don't put in buyer to do this within 24 hours, because I'm a hard ass. Well, you're a hard ass who hasn't read the contract. The contract that you're now trying to enforce, don't embarrass yourself. The reality is if you give them 24 hours, the reality is the other agent hasn't read the contract either, and they take it for the gospel. But that's not what this says. You have to give them 2 days after delivery. Okay, then we can talk about what all that means. Okay? So, effective buyer's removal of contingency. Buyer moves in writing, again in writing, active, not passive. That's exactly what Steve was just talking about. Then we move forward, everything's out. I'm going to go a little bit faster. This, not that this is important or not important, but this is pretty straightforward stuff. You know, I can go on with different stories, but effective buyer's removal of contingency is exactly that. If I remove the contingency for the appraisal, I cannot subsequently come back and say, oh, I don't want to buy the house because of the appraisal. I'm in. My deposit's at risk. Okay? So, it's important. Close of escrow. Before seller or buyer may cancel this agreement for failure of the other party to close escrow, pursuant to this agreement, seller must first deliver to the, buyer or seller must first deliver a demand to close escrow. Who does that? There is a CAR form, DCE, demand to close escrow. It's very simple. You're not performing. You're out of contract. Send them a demand to close. If they don't sign it or acknowledge it, now you can cancel. It says right here. This doesn't get done. I see escrows canceled all the time. I don't see demand to close escrow in there. It says right here, before either party, buyer or seller, can cancel for the failure of the other party. Forget about what the reasons. Buyer or seller must. It doesn't say may, could, should, if they want to. It says they must. This is the deal. I get agents sometimes get frustrated by this. You're not going to believe this guy, man. Every other time I turn around, I get these notices to perform. Sounds like he's on his game. You got a problem? Well, it's getting a little annoying. Well, then perform. You know? But you're not going to believe this. I got it, you know, this, gosh dang. I demand to close. Sounds like they want to close. Sounds like you probably got a contract date coming up. Sounds like for some reason the other party is worried about your ability to perform. Are you going to perform? Well, I've been telling them we need more time. Well, apparently he doesn't want to give you more time. Demand to close. He's setting you up to cancel. Which, you know what? I like it. I like that. There was an agent in this town years ago, had a terrible reputation. Not as a bad guy. His reputation was, geez, you go on a deal with Norbert, it's like opening an escrow with an attorney. Every time you turn around, well, you know what? His deal's closed. He had no tolerance for nonsense. And it would be very simple. You agreed to it, I'm just holding you to it. Send you letter after letter after letter. Looked like they were written by an attorney. And you know what? They really weren't. All he did is you know why people say look like an attorney? He would just quote the contract. Pursuant to, and then he would write this out. People were, oh my God, well look at Norbert. I'm like, well no, actually, all he really did is just, he took a cut and paste the paragraph that your client agreed to. You act like this is the first time you've ever heard of it before. I never heard of it. You never heard of it. It's paragraph F in the contract that your client signed, which again, don't answer this question. There's many people who've never read the contract that are selling real estate. Never read the contract. Okay, it's not that long, guys. It's 8 pages. Have a nice tea, sit down, take an hour, maybe take 4 or 5 hours, read it 4 or 5 times. God forbid you memorize a couple pieces of it. Okay? It's amazing how much easier these things are to fill out after you've read them.
And practice, fill it out a few times.
And practice. Okay, so there's our, now repairs, this is important. Paragraph 15 talks about repairs. Repairs shall, number 1, be completed prior to final verification of the condition. Normally that's what we refer to as the walkthrough. unless otherwise agreed in writing. I would suggest we're very careful that if you do agree and contractually obligate a seller to commit repairs, you rarely, if ever want to make those repairs to be completed after close of escrow. Just as a general given, you want to get them done prior to close of escrow. Having said that, as you've heard me say in other classes, I am not a big fan of negotiating repairs. I do not like, on either side of the transaction, to negotiate repairs. I would much rather negotiate price, sales price. We think the roof is going to cost $5,000. So, oh God, really? If you can, sometimes you can't get away with it. Sometimes those repairs have to be done as a contingency of the loan approval. But on those other little things, negotiate price. Okay? Negotiate price. Don't negotiate to have a repair done. Normally, you'll be disappointed. Repairs to be performed at seller's expense may be performed by the seller, or through seller or through others, provided the work complies with applicable. It says right there the seller can do it. I don't want him doing it. It says he can do it. He's not a plumber. Well, he's handy, or not. Okay. So again, now of course the get out of jail, of course that the work complies with the applicable law. Okay, well they got to do a good job, including the governmental permit, inspection and approval process. Anybody replace a hot water heater in their house in the last 5 years, 10 years?
Oh, yeah.
How garbage disposal? Washer, dry, a washing machine? You don't have to have a permit to do all of that through the city. You know, if you put a sprinkler valve in your front yard, you're supposed to have a permit. Who does that? I don't do that. People don't do that. Well, that's not what the contract says. So again, be careful with that sort of stuff. Repairs shall be performed in a good, skilled, and polite manner. It is understood that the exact restoration. Okay, fair enough, we got that covered. Final verification of condition. This is your walkthrough. All I can tell you guys is do them. Okay? And actually, the default in the contract is 5 days prior. That's fine. But I like, if you're going to do your final walkthrough 5 days prior, then you need to do the final, at least let's check to make sure the place hasn't burned down the day before. Okay? Or early the day of. It's countless. I mean, it's more than 25, 30 times. I've closed an escrow the day after or the day of close of escrow, after confirmation, the buyer or the agent, oh, somebody broke in, oh, just damn it. Wow, you guys did your walkthrough? Yeah, 5 days ago. Was it like that 5 days ago? No. It's like that this morning? Yeah. Sorry. You know, turn it into your insurance company. Sorry. You know, also you need to, again, this has been done, this gets done all the time, I understand it. I will probably do this again at some time before my real estate career is over. But you really need to avoid, like the plague, doing final walkthroughs on behalf of your client. Okay? Oh geez, but Lance, they were out of the country. Or they couldn't make it. I get it. All I can tell you is you're asking for trouble. You're asking for trouble. What you thought was acceptable is now not acceptable to your client. And you said, you looked at it, you told me everything was fine. It is fine. Are you kidding me? Look at this carpet. You know?
Too much liability.
Absolutely. Too much liability. Which, by the way, it is not a contingency of the sale, doing the walkthrough. And it amazes me how many times people waive it. You know, I bet, I don't know what percent, a large percentage of the escrows that I close where I represented the seller, buyer doesn't do a walkthrough. Can I get again, I don't know, what do we call it again? The final verification of condition form, the VP.
Yep.
Okay? Hey, can I get the walkthrough form? No. Why not? We didn't do it. Really? Okay. Your call. Okay, proration of property taxes and other items. We touched on this a little bit about security deposit with a tenant that's in place or rent on a tenant in place. Anything that a seller has paid on behalf of the well, on behalf of themselves, I suppose, that should be prorated needs to be dealt with in escrow. So let's talk about a few things. Normally, things that are prorated in escrow are things like property taxes, interest on mortgage payments, which really doesn't have an impact on the buyer, but it certainly has an impact on the seller. Homeowners association dues, maybe special assessment taxes, Melrose, which normally all kind of fall under the property tax. When you hear property taxes, special assessment taxes, Melrose taxes, special assessment district taxes, there's probably 5 or 6 others. Those are all kind of property taxes generally, different little titles. Those are all to be prorated. Insurance, premiums, whatever it happens to be. So let's go through, we talked about this a little bit more when we talked about filling out net sheets, so let's just take a couple examples because it looks like we're gonna go over, maybe, even though we still got a couple more pages left, we're still on track. We're maybe gonna go over 15 minutes past 3. So let's talk about mortgage interest for one. I am the seller. Today is September 26th. I made my September 1st house payment, okay? My September 1st house payment, is that paid in the rears? Oh, advance. So in other words, the September 1st house payment I made, does that cover August? Or does my September 1st house payment cover September going forward? Okay, it covers August. The house, which unlike rent, and this is why a lot of buyers and sellers for that matter get confused when it comes to this. When we're young and we're renting houses, you don't get to stay in the house in September unless you pay the September rent. No. You pay first, then you get to stay. Well, that's not how it works with the mortgage. Okay? Mortgage, that payment covers in the rears. So if I'm talking to my seller and we're closing today, and my seller is thinking in his mind or her mind, I've already paid my September payment, that's cool. Well, actually they haven't. They're going to get charged 26 days of interest on their payoff. And they may think, which in some cases could be a lot of money. Maybe they got $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 house payment. Let's say $3,000 of that is interest. Well, guess what happened to that seller's net sheet? It just got reduced by almost $3,000, 26 days worth. Could that be a challenge? Is that something you need to know? Yes. Now the buyer could care less about that. That doesn't really affect the buyer. But the buyer cares about property taxes. The buyer cares about rent that's been paid. Buyer cares about homeowners association dues, and the seller should as well. Homeowners association dues, for example, are normally paid in advance. Okay, so there would be some sort of a credit going back and forth. Bottom line is all of that stuff is prorated. Property taxes, the whole 9 yards. And it has an impact on your buyer's net and the amount of money your buyers are going to be responsible to bring in and the amount of money your sellers are going to be responsible. We spend a lot more time talking about this in the disclosure class, specifically with property taxes. So we'll go through that a little bit more later. Selection of any questions on that, Ryan? Okay. Selection of services. Again, this is broker-owned escrow. I recommend ABC Title, XYZ Plumber. Again, be careful. We have a little disclosure in here to kind of cover us. Even though this contract is not between the realtor, it's between buyer and seller, there's language in here that helps us a little bit. Brokers do not guarantee the performance of any vendors, service or product providers, whether referred by broker or selected by buyer. Buyer and seller may select any provider of their own choosing. Now the reality is most of the time they're looking to us. They're looking for record. They don't do this all the time. Who's a good escrow company? Who's a good title company? Okay. But again, and we talked about this I think last week. We never lose a deal over escrow title. Okay, that's unacceptable. We're not going to do that. Multiple listing service. Again, this is more of a disclosure, but it's in the contract. Brokers are authorized to report to the MLS a pending sale, and upon close of escrow, the sales price and other terms, yada, yada, yada. Believe it or not, some people don't like that. What do you mean that you're going to put in there how much I paid for it? Come on, guys, it's public record. Well, I don't like that. Yeah. Sorry, it's public record. Whether we put it in the MLS or not, it's gonna be public record. So that's in there. Equal housing opportunity, of course, as long, you know, the phrase that I've used, I stole from somebody years ago, was as long as their money is green, we're gonna sell them the house, okay? Needless to say, we cannot discriminate against anybody based upon all the protected classes. Race, religion, sexual orientation, physical handicap, there's 4 or 5 others. I'm probably not being sensitive because I don't remember all of them. But at any rate, we sell to anybody as long as they can qualify and they've got the ability to buy. Attorney's fees, this is a very basic standard attorney fees provision. And in effect what this is saying is in the event there is legal action, doesn't have to be a lawsuit, mediation, arbitration, whatever it happens to be, between the buyer and seller arising out of this agreement, the prevailing buyer or seller shall be entitled to reasonable attorney fees. Very, very standard. So if somebody gets litigated against and loses, they could potentially be responsible to pay the attorney's costs associated with that. Here's our definitions. We kind of joked about this a little bit earlier. I'm not going to go through every one of these. What does acceptance mean? What is a car form? It's really funny. I throw that term around all the time. Car. You know, the California Association of Realtors. Believe it or not, there's a lot of realtors that don't quite know that, especially if you're new to the business. We have a lot of acronyms. We have a lot of fancy names. Don't be embarrassed if you're new to raise your hand and say, excuse me, you know, a BIA, Buyer's Inspection Advisory, an RPA, that's what this form is, Real Estate Purchase Agreement. You know, what were we just talking about? Oh, CAR. And sometimes it's going to sound, oh geez, that was kind of silly, I should have known that.
Sierra's a trust question.
Is it? Okay.
Really?
Well, there you go. But think about it. Think about, okay, well, just to kind of somewhat prove my point. And again, when in doubt, Google, right? So, oops. Okay, I just did CAR. We're not the first one. Cars, is it unreasonable for people, what do you got, some sort of car club or something? I don't understand what's going on. Okay?
Hot rods.
Exactly, all right? So, and again, we're car.org.
The maps for cars.
A lot of, yeah, maps for cars. Exactly, but think about it. I mean, I'm a consumer, I'm a brand new realtor. www.car.com. Right, because nobody does car.org. Gosh, Lance keeps talking about, he's really into this car thing. I don't know what's going on here. What is it? I
There's
think-
Lance's new car.
Yeah, right, you know, I think it's kind of like a Kelly Blue Book thing, but I'm not quite sure, all right? So again, just be careful and don't be afraid to ask the questions, okay? And to be honest with you, you'd be amazed, you may ask somebody the question, who's throwing around the acronym, they may not even know what the hell what it stands for, okay? Which is a little embarrassing on their side. So anyway, we've got close of escrow, what does it mean? What does a copy mean? Electronic copies are fine. Matter of fact, I bet a few in this room don't even know what NCR stands for. Those are the carbonless paper we used to have. Remember the old CAR forms?
Oh, yeah.
Treasurer stamp.
And those were the something, I don't even know what NCR stands for. I know it's National Cash Register, but I don't think that's what it stands for there. It's for the carbonless forms that we used to use. You don't even see that anymore. When's the last time you guys signed a piece of paper and then they pulled out the back perforated copy and gave it to you? Well, that was standard practice, okay? It wasn't that long ago where we questioned whether or not a fax copy was good. Is an email copy good? Now we're going to have, what other sort of electronic delivery system can we use? Is tweeting a copy of a contract sufficient? You're shaking your head, no, I don't know if that is or not. It may be. If I tweeted you a contract and you replied back to me, I received it in another tweet, I think I'm good. But again, I don't know. I mean, things are moving so rapidly, you know? I don't do this. I would imagine people are instant messaging people back and stuff in Facebook. Hey, I got this, I got that, blah, blah, good, go. Hey, can I order your inspection for you? It's gonna cost $500. I'm not talking an email. I sent you a message in Facebook. And you come back, or I texted you. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, can I want to order the home inspection. It's gonna cost $500. Do you approve? Yes, Lance, please order it. I have a text. I gotta tell you, I think that's probably valid. But that's the whole world that we're in. So at any rate, what does a copy mean? Days, days after, days prior, electronic copy. Electronic copy or electronic signature means as applicable an electronic copy or signature complying with, okay, well, does those stuff comply? Again, I'm not talking contracts. They got a tweet, you can't sign a contract with a tweet. But can you authorize me to do something with a tweet? I think you can, So anyway, blah, 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 all sorts of fun stuff. What does a repair mean? What does sign mean? Broker's compensation. Back in the old days, on the page 8 of the contract, it would specifically outline broker's compensation. It would say 3% to Joe and 3% to Sally or the companies or whatever it happens to be. That's not on here anymore. We don't put the only thing we have on here is this paragraph. Seller or buyer, or both, as applicable, agrees to pay compensation to broker specified in a separate written agreement. In our case, it's a listing agreement. Listing agreement says that we're going to get X amount of dollars in compensation, or X amount of percent. Through the multiple listing service, the listing agent posts what compensation they're offering, offer of compensation to the outside agents. Outside agents agree to accept that. Which, by the way, you cannot change that. If I put in the listing in the MLS, I'm offering 2% commission, and you choose to write an offer on my listing, you cannot then send me a change that says, no, I'm not going to do it for 2. You've got to, I want 3. You can't do that's a violation of MLS rules. You can't change it. Okay, joint escrow instructions. I'm going to go all the way back up to the top. I'm going to try to go all the way to the top. I'm thinking about going up to the top. I'm not going up to the top. What happened here? Good Lord. I'm not going anywhere. Where am I? Okay. California Residential Purchase Agreement, RPA, and joint escrow instructions. Again, old school, used to have escrow instructions, it's independent. New school, contract is the contract is the escrow instruction. Okay, apologize if I'm making you nauseated. So, this section in here is basically an instruction to the escrow holder. These are the things that you need to do. Okay? This is what we're asking you. By the way, the escrow holder is very simple. The escrow holder is truly neutral, third party. They do what the contract says, nothing more, nothing less. You want to make a change, has to be in writing, both parties have to agree to it. Doesn't matter what change it is, doesn't matter how insignificant the change is. Escrow holder cannot make that change without all parties agreeing to it. So, now occasionally you have escrow holders that don't comply with this. They don't like to use the CAR form. And they'll redraft everything and they'll do it the old school way. The way we used to, although we've had this now, how long have we had this? 10 years?
I think
or
at
longer?
least, yeah.
This has become more and more acceptable as a form of escrow instructions, but when this first came out, the escrow holder said, "Are you kidding me? We're not going to accept this as your escrow instructions. We're going to create our own escrow instructions." But again, this is the part that is, and by the way, this says joint escrow instructions to escrow holder. So these are the instructions to the escrow company, and it basically says, do what we said. Do everything it says up there on the contract. Pretty simple stuff. Okay. Liquidated damages. Liquidated damages we've talked about in code a couple, 3 times. I always recommend buyers and sellers sign liquidated damages. When we talked earlier about earnest money deposit and we talked about capping it at 3%, this is why. This paragraph is the reason we keep making those comments. Liquidated damages. If buyer fails to complete the purchase because of the buyer's fault, they just canceled, or all of those reasons that they weren't able to comply, seller shall retain as liquidated damages the deposit actually paid. So let's suppose they only paid $500 and the seller only agreed to $500. The damages that the seller can get is what they actually paid, $500. Okay? The deposit actually paid. If the price, so they can't say, wait, they only gave me $500, I want $20,000 worth of damages. Nope. You initial liquidated damages, the most damages you can get is $500. If the property is a dwelling within 1 to 4, there's a lot of 1 to 4, that's on the real estate exam. 1 to 4 is considered basically residential property. Anything above 4 is multi-units, even though 2, 3, and 4 units are multi-units. The rules are just different. Of which one of the buyer intends to occupy, then the amount retained shall be no more than 3% of the purchase price. So this is why I say, even if the seller, the buyer puts in $100,000, the most that the most that the seller can get is 3%. The problem for the buyer is the $100,000 is now tied up.
It's not captive.
It's hostage. It's captive. Exactly. So they can the sell amount retained shall be no more than 3% of the purchase price. Any excess shall be returned to buyer. Release of funds will be required. But again, it's so nice. But then it says release of funds shall require mutual signed release instruction both buyer and seller, a judicial decision, or an arbitration award. But what if the seller's being a jerk? They're not. It says that, well, if they don't want to sign, then it forces the buyer to some sort of judicial or arbitration award. Okay? At the time of the increased deposit, the buyer and seller should sign a separate liquidated damages provision for any increased deposit. Nobody does that. I don't think I've ever seen an RID form ever in my life.
I haven't either. Hey Lance, if you, if we're the listing agent, and, well, no matter what, if on liquidated damages, only the buyer or only the seller would initial and both have it,
Yep.
we want to clean that up with a counter.
It needs to be addressed. Yep. If the buyer, exactly, and that applies to anything, but let's just apply it to this. The buyers have initialed this, but for some reason the sellers, they won't. No, I'm not doing liquidated damages. We need to counter it out. Paragraph 25, initialed by the buyer is no longer full of force. Buyer and seller understand that liquidated damages clause is not part of this agreement. Or vice versa. You know, the buyer did not initial this. The seller says, I want it, then you got to counter it back. Buyer to initial paragraph 25 for liquidated damages. All parties agree to, comply with paragraph 25. I got to tell you, it's very, we seem to, as an industry, seem to have embraced liquidated damages. People just seem to either sign it, or if they forget and we ask them to, they tend to sign it. I cannot remember the last time I got in a disagreement over someone not wanting to buy. And by the way, to me, it wouldn't be a disagreement. If my client doesn't want to do it, I'm all right, I'll do it. Okay? And then in that particular case, then those rules don't apply. But in most cases, it's beneficial to both parties. Okay? Because in most cases, the buyers are not putting down 3% anyway. Okay? So at least you've got something in the game. Okay, mediation arbitration. Again, we could do a 3-day class on mediation arbitration. We won't. But basically what this says, this is agreed to in the contract. And again, in most cases, buyers and sellers, just like liquidated damages, agree to mediation arbitration. And again, we tend to forget about this. This is important. Buyer and seller agree to mediate any dispute or claim arising out of this agreement or any resulting transaction before resorting to arbitration or court action. It says right here you got to mediate first. They agreed to that. I'm suing you. I tell you, I've been in these situations where somebody is sued and you get in front of the judge and say, I told him we had to mediate. Case dismissed. Go mediate first. So you do your meeting. And by the way, it's rare that it goes to a full-blown arbitration or a court case. I mean, it happens. But the reality is you sit down in most of these mediations, you come up with some sort of an agreement. Cooler heads prevail. You got a mediator that sits back and kind of does his thing. Say, hey, come on. This is what you're going to get. And although I'm not a big fan of mediation arbitration, the ones that I participated in have ultimately led to the desired result. We kind of got the thing done, and it's prevented people from going further with court action, which is really what it was all about. Okay? So again, we mediate first, and again, you got to remember, they are agreeing to mediate before, because arbitration is heavier. Okay? A binding arbitration, and if you end up in arbitration, it could be binding. This is what you say. I don't like that. I want to go to court. No. here you are. Having said that, I've also seen clients that have sued, skipped the mediation arbitration completely, and nobody said anything about it. Nobody said, hey, you were supposed to mediate or arbitrate first. No, whatever, we're going to court. And they agreed to it. Nobody seems to say boo. Okay, again, buyer and seller's initial there. I'm going to get close to wrapping this up. Terms and conditions of the offer. This is it. Basically what it says. Everything that we just did. Those are the terms and conditions. This is an offer to purchase the property on the above terms and conditions. Okay? I don't even know why that's there. Oh, you put in damages paragraph. What's up there is what we agreed to. You got it? Time is of the essence. Pretty straightforward. This is the, and again, it sounds so silly, but when I look at this paragraph, what this tells me is, if you said you were going to do something in 7 days, do it. If you said you were going to get your loan approved and your appraisal done in 17 days, do it. If you said you were going to close on September 27th, do it. If you don't do that, you need to extend, amend, modify, or alter contract, which, by the way, can't be done without both party agreement. So if you decide to extend, amend, alter, so on and so forth, you better have the buy-in of the person on the other side of the contract. Otherwise, you may not have a house. Very simple. Do what you say you're going to do. Okay, and then last but not least, we finally made it to page 8. I used this as an example on the very beginning of our class when we did this last week. And we, I think, immediately jumped to page 8 and we started talking about this. So let's kind of revisit this signature page just a little bit. These offers have a shelf life, okay? You can't have an offer out there forever. It's actually illegal. You have to have a start and end date to a contract in every offer. So, expiration of the offer. This offer shall be deemed revoked, and deposits shall be returned unless the offer is signed by seller, and a copy of the signed offer is personally received by buyer or buyer's representative. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So, bottom line is, I think I gave the example that you went to the river and you called your, okay. Well, be careful. I mean, those are real examples. And you could get in a lot of liability for not delivering offers in a timely. Now, it's one thing if your seller is just not available. Can't get a hold of them. I can't get a hold of them. Well, that's fine. You did your job. You got 15 emails and 17 phone calls. And you knocked on the door 6 times. Boy, you went above and beyond. But if you, as the agent, disappear during this window, you could be in serious trouble. Okay, so now there's a couple trains of thought on what to put in here. Okay, for years, and this is how I still do it to this day, is I want to be the person to receive this. So in other words, we need to have it signed by the seller, and a copy of the signed offer is personally received by buyer or Lance Martin, who is authorized to receive it. And here's our time frame. Now, there is a problem with putting Lance Martin. What if Lance Martin, which by the way, it's very, 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 very rare that this ultimately ever goes straight to the back to the buyer. That would be unusual. Matter of fact, if a listing agent returned a fully executed contract directly to my buyer, I'd have a problem with that. And agency law would have a little bit of a problem with that. Now again, for me, I'm okay with me putting Lance Martin here. Now the challenge with me, what happens if I do check myself out?
You have many Lance Martins behind you.
Okay. Well, again, I'm okay with that, but there is another train of thought that would indicate, the company, received by Cole, Baker, Town and Country, which in effect they could deliver it to the front desk. They could have faxed it over to us. It could have been sitting on a fax machine or something like that. Now, again, I understand the logic. Steve, I think is kind of maybe agreeing with it's better to put the company than the individual agent.
It's a control thing.
It is a control thing, and I'm a control freak. This is my suggestion, though. Let's just suppose for a minute you put your name in there. Received by Lance Martin. Okay. I know if I've got offers outstanding. I also know if I happen to have some personal engagements going on. If I am not prepared to juggle both of my offer obligations to my client and my personal engagements, then I need to be prepared to engage a manager or somebody else on my behalf that says, hey, I'm checking out for the next couple of days, going to Mexico, which for me is about the only time I potentially could be unavailable for a couple of days. I'm going to Mexico, I'm going riding, and depending on where I'm at, man, I could be unavailable. If I have some of this stuff out and it says Lance Martin, I'm Steve, you're my man. Here's the access to my email, here's the access to this, I need you to follow up with this, and you're going to be the guy. You're my broker, you're my manager, you're gonna receive that for me. If Steve's not available, then I gotta go to the backup, the number 2 or the number 3 or whatever it happens to be, because once that comes in, and again, by the way, we talked about proper receipt electronically. This is why now more than ever, I have less of a problem with putting an individual agent in there, because pretty much no matter where I am, I'm gonna get it, right? Boom, there it is. I've received it, acknowledged. Email it back.
I've always just put agent, but I think I like the idea of the company name better.
Yep, and that's, well, but you can
As long as you're on
agent,
top of it, that's.
agent could be a trouble though, because agent, what does agent mean? Is that you?
Anybody.
Yeah,
Well, if you're gonna, I don't like agent. It's either you
And I
or the
agree,
company.
hearing what I'm hearing right now, I totally agree with you on
Right.
that.
You or the company. Now, again, some of the danger with the company is, and again, somebody just faxes something in, and it's sitting somewhere, and says, well, you told me to send it, I forgot what your name was, Debbie. What do you mean you forgot what my name is? We go down here and read it a little bit further. But anyway, bottom line is we have to be diligent on this. And quite honestly, if you're on top of your business, this should never be an issue. Should never, ever be an issue. So again, in company or you, 3 days, if 3 days is not, and there will be times when 3 days is too long or too short. So change it.
on
I-
acceptance.
Yeah, so,
On,
yeah.
Presentation.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
You accept it now, or
Or,
I'm
it's
out.
done.
I got another appointment at 7 o'clock. I'm leaving here. I'm going over there. Yeah.
That's why you said hopefully this date's the same date as, last week you said hopefully this date is the same date as the date on page 1.
This date and this date.
Yeah.
Okay, you got it. Okay, let's. Excellent point, though. Okay, let's read it. Expiration of offer. This offer shall be deemed revoked, and deposit shall be returned unless offer is signed by the seller and a copy is personally delivered by the buyer. Okay, by Lance Martin, who is authorized to receive at 5 p.m. on the 3rd day after offer is signed by buyer. This is where it gets confusing. Let's suppose I wrote this offer yesterday, the 24th, 5th, 25th. But the buyer actually didn't sign it until today. So the date we're talking about is this date, not that date. So potentially you've got people looking at this, because to be honest with you, when I look at offer dates, I don't normally look at this date. I'm normally looking at the date up in the upper right-hand corner. Well, that could be the wrong date. For this purpose, paragraph 29, the date we're looking for is this date. Now, if it's the same, no big deal. If it's different, we got a problem. So, but don't get overly hung up on that. In most cases, the day you prepare the offer, the buyer's going to sign it. But again, even if with the best efforts, you think they're signing the offer today. You're sitting here in the conference room, you're ready to rock and roll, you're fully expecting them to sign it, and you get one of these, oh, William,
Sleep
you
on
know,
it.
can we, let me and the missus just go home and sleep on it. And they sleep on it for 3 days. And then it comes back and it's signed October 1st. Well, it's still valid. The original date is that. There's nothing, that does not invalidate it. I would imagine at some point, if you wrote the offer 45 days ago and that they signed it now, I might have a problem with that. But a couple, 3, 4, 5 days, I don't think. You got a
Property
problem with that?
shouldn't be
No, that's fine,
available.
that's fine.
Yeah, but again, but just for clarity purposes, the farther out that date gets, it's, oh, you've been sleeping on it, huh? Woo, okay, well, let's see, we wrote that thing 2 months ago. I tell you what, come on in, let me get you a fresh one, I'd like to put today's date on it, okay? Because if for no other reason, now you're really gonna cause yourself some confusion and some problems. You're gonna have listing agents and sellers looking at, what the hell's going on? They wrote this offer 2 months ago, and they just decided to sign it today. Okay, we are on the home stretch, which is good, because we're 20 after. Okay, so, buyer's date, buyer's sign, buyer's print, buyer's address. If you have more than 2 buyers, then use the additional signature deal. It's very difficult to cram all that in. It's impossible to do it if you're typing it in on WinForms. So you have to use that, what's it called, the additional signatory. What is it?
Conditional signature form?
Is that what it's called? Close enough.
Close enough.
Okay, so you're gonna plug that in. Now we have an acceptance. That's what you want. Okay? Seller, don't check the box. Seller dates, signs, prints, does all the rest of that sort of stuff. We're good to go. Offer's fully accepted. You're fine. We're gonna get back to a counter offer in a minute. Once this buyer signs, the seller signs, this is another one of those areas, quite honestly, that we tend to overlook. But what we should have is confirmation of acceptance. A copy of the signed acceptance was personally received by buyer or buyer's authorized person, the guy up top. I got it today, this is my time, it's good to go, and I'm initialing it, then I'm sending it back. Now we've completely closed the loop. We've got an offer, we've got an acceptance, we've got a confirmation of acceptance. As opposed to, I never got your acceptance. What do you mean you never got it? I never got it. We accepted something else. Okay. Now, when you have multiple offers and things are going all haywire and just going, back crazy, probably a pretty good idea to get a confirmation of acceptance. But again, a significant percentage of the offers, the agents are not getting confirmation of acceptance. They're just not getting it. Now, let's go back to the counter offer real quick. If the seller wants to counter something that's very simple, you check the date, you check the box, you plug in your counteroffer dated September 27th, and then you sign it. Your seller signs everything. Seller, you are signing the offer subject to the changes that we made in the counteroffer dated today. So the seller signs, now we ship it on over. And then we kind of repeat the process in reverse. Now the buyer has an opportunity to take a look at it, and then the buyer either signs and we're good, or the buyer can say, okay, we agree to your counteroffer, subject to the changes that we make. And hopefully whatever you're negotiating over is, a price or something minor. So when you start getting counters that have 12 items on them, you know you're in trouble. Either you've written the offer poorly or there's a client that's unreasonable here somewhere. Okay, and then lastly, this is just the relatively easy part. Here's our real estate brokers. One thing that I learned yesterday with the new integration with Zip Forms and the MLS is this information will populate for us, which is kind of cool. So if you punch in the listing number or something like that, it'll take the listing agent information and put in their VRE number and office number, which is kind of cool. It's kind of one of those things that's been a nuisance in the past. Oh, geez. What's his number? Go in and check it out. So it'll populate that. Now remember, if you're the selling firm, this is company, Coldwell-Banker Town & Country, company license number, by agent, Johnny, your license number, and then office address, so on and so forth. Your email. Pretty straightforward stuff, but then the same thing on the listing side. And then down on the bottom, assuming the escrow holder likes your purchase contract, then your escrow holder should fill out their information and basically accept this as your escrow instructions. And they should get that back to you as part of the contract. You should get page 8 signed back by your escrow holder saying that we acknowledge this. And then of course, last but not least, we've got the, these are relatively new. The rejection's been there for a while, but the presentation, I don't know when that showed up, maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And this is basically saying, hey, I presented your offer to the seller. Because, do we have buyers who I don't even think they presented my offer to the seller. Okay, well this at least is something in writing. By the way, the buyer's not signing, the seller's not signing. This is the broker or the agent saying, your offer was presented to the seller. Or, better yet, or worse yet, seller says, your offer's rejected, we're not making a counter. Okay? So, just flat rate. And again, a lot of times these steps get just overlooked. What's up? Offer's rejected. All right, cool. Occasionally, and to be honest, it's a nuisance. When I have a buyer's agent ask me to do this, I don't argue with them. But I hang up the phone, I got crap. It's just one more thing to do. But it's good practice.
Sure.
We should do that. Matter of fact, they shouldn't have to ask me. If I'm gonna reject their offer, I should just do this out of regular course of business. One of the reasons I say, oh crap, is I'm so accustomed to selling foreclosure properties. Fannie Mae's not gonna sign this, Freddie Mac's not gonna sign this. You just have to take my word for it. You don't believe me, call them. Call them and they'll tell you your offer was rejected. Because they will not sign this. Now, of course, this is a broker, and again, this is only as good as your agent's word, right? It does not say, yes, your offer was presented by the seller. This is just us saying, yeah, we presented your offer. So, okay, so we did that, not too bad, 2.5 hours. So with this 2.5 hours, and I think last week we did 2.5 hours, we spent about 5 hours talking about this. To be honest with you, other than hopefully some somewhat entertaining stories, I haven't told you anything that you couldn't have read yourself. I basically read you the contract. And I skipped probably 30-40% of it. Just kind of let you fill in the blanks. So this is where you guys need to go from here. You need to go home and you need to read this. And if there's anything within the contract that's unclear to you, you need to come back. And God forbid you figure it out yourself. A lot of this stuff, not that common sense will figure all of it out, but you come in, you study it, you fill them out, you practice, you talk to me, you talk to Steve, you talk to whoever your sales manager is. Frankly, some of this stuff, if you're so inclined and you're interested, you can call CAR Legal. Call the CAR Legal. You guys are paying for it. You're paying CAR Legal. I don't think they get these type of questions a lot. Normally when someone calls CAR Legal, they're complaining about an agent or something's happening. But if you say, hey, I'm an agent and this is my CAR number and I'm really confused about this liquidated damages things, can you help me out? They'll take 3-4 minutes on the phone. They'll probably send you a Q&A or a briefer or a more expanded explanation of what it is. Now again, I don't know that that's your first place to go, but it's there for you. I'm here, Steve's there. But the main thing, and especially for some of our brand new or newer agents, is, and I said this earlier and I'll close with this, if the first time you are filling out an offer is when you are in front of your first client, shame on you, okay? And I gotta tell you, this may sound a little cold, or this may sound like, oh, Lance is a mean broker.
Oops, sorry. That's on video?
I want you to participate, I want you to engage us, but if you're asking me questions that I think you should have probably picked up with a little bit of your own study, your response for me will not be as warm as it otherwise would, okay? A totally separate example, but it's the same thing. We've been in a short sale market for years, okay? We've had agents within the brokerage that have worked in the office for they're not new agents, they've been around for a while. They come to me at 2 o'clock on a Friday. I have a short sale appointment at 3:30. Can you help me out? What do I do? I'm like, you mean you have a question about these things? No. I have a question about all of it. Okay, wait a minute. We've been in a short sale market for a couple of years. You've had your license at this office for 6 or 7 months. We've done a half a dozen trainings on short sales. Ivar's done 2 dozen trainings on short sales. And you just decided now to engage in business and you are coming to me an hour before your appointment and you want me to do everything for you. The response that you're going to get is going to be a different response than you might think. Not that we don't want to be helpful. Now if you come to me a week or today and say, you know what, I know I haven't engaged in this market, but I've decided I want to be the short sale expert, can you help me? Yeah, of course. This is what I want you to do. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to go watch the 4 videos we have online. It's going to take you about 8 hours. Watch them, study them, read a couple things, come back to me next Tuesday. Then we'll sit back, we're going to give you some homework, and we're going to get you ready. Because when you get ready to go get that appointment a week from now, we're going to be ready. And I'm okay with that, perfectly okay with that. But asking me how to fill out a net sheet an hour before the listing appointment, asking me how to fill out an offer 10 minutes before, And again, by the way, if you find yourself in that situation and the client's in here, even though I've now just terrified you, come get us.
Or you can
Come
always
get
just
us.
refer the client over to me.
Or-
I'll
Oh,
pay
it's
their
so
referral
sweet.
fee.
But come get us. I can't tell you how many times, literally, someone's came in with the questions and the client is in the conference room.
Uh-oh.
And I kind of grumble under my breath. I'm like, all right, guess what? We're gonna come in, we're gonna roll up the sleeves, we're gonna sit at the conference table, we're gonna go through it. We're not gonna throw you guys to the wolves, okay? But you gotta take some responsibility.